Personally, I am boosted out off the wazoo. I just got my 4th booster, so. Well, no. So we got the first 2, right? And then 1 booster and another. So my 4th shot.
No, that ain't 5.
No. Yeah.
I'm getting my boost, my second boost.
Yeah. Okay. All right, team, we're going to start in just a second, as soon as I can get everybody's attention. I know I have Daniel's because I'm about 23 seconds late, Daniel. Sorry about that. All right, good morning and welcome to the Orange County School Board's work session, which has been scheduled today for the purpose of discussing the following school board policies: JCA, assignment of students to school, JFBD, magnet school programs, JICI, weapons in school, JICK, threats, JLF, reporting child abuse protection, JLIE, student automobile use, JJ, extracurricular activities, and JBBA, parental rights and responsibilities. Today, the public will not have an opportunity to participate in this work session to provide public comment because there is not a regularly scheduled school board meeting, so no action will be taken, and there will be no pre-agenda period in which the public might normally address the school board on relevant topics that are related to the work of the board. So thank you all so much for being here. Those of you that are, I think most everybody I see in the room is OCPS staff, and we appreciate your support here today. Board members are attending, some in person. 3 of us are in person. Some of us are participating virtually, and a few are either ill or personal obligations that prevent them from participating today. So with that, let me take a quick roll call. Let me begin with Member Lopez.
Good morning, Madam Chair.
Good morning. Member Colbert.
Good morning, Chair.
Good morning. Member Gould.
Good morning, Chair.
Good morning, Member Gould. Dr. Castor-Dental, and I believe we do not have Dr. Castor-Dental joining us today. Vice Chair Byrd.
Good morning, Chair.
Good morning. And myself. Feels like I missed somebody, but I guess not. Oh, and Member Felder. We know that Member Felder is not available to join us today, and Member Gallo will be arriving, I'm told, shortly, and we will recognize her when she arrives. So for that purpose, we do not have quorum at this time, but we are not taking any action on any items. This is just a work session and discussion. So according to our general counsel, we are it is appropriate for us to move forward. I also want to remind the public and the board members that we will not be engaging in outside electronic or digital communication during the meeting so that we can focus on the meeting itself, giving our attention to the matters immediately before us. To my fellow board members and district staff, when speaking, please make sure your microphone is turned on and speak directly into it so that our YouTube and Orange TV viewers can hear you clearly. And now we'll begin with a moment of silence followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. And now for the pledge. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Dr. Jenkins, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board. We will be walking through 8 policies in the board's work session. This is the first time the board has an opportunity to discuss as a group the various policies. Cabinet did go through and make some adjustments prior to bringing these to you, but look forward to hearing the board's input and direction regarding school board policies as listed on the screen. Sarah Kopesky will be, the moderator to help walk us through, and various staff members will be a part of the discussions based on the actual topic. With that, let's begin.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. Good morning. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. Perfect. As Dr. Jenkins stated, we're here for the work session for the policies as listed on the screen. I'm joined today with members from Student Enrollment, School Choice, Student Discipline, and members of the District Threat Assessment Team. Our agenda for today is we're going to do the overview, timeline, summary of actions, proposed revisions, next steps, questions, and discussions. For these 8 policies, our tentative schedule, yesterday we were at Cabinet. Today we're at the work session. On May 3rd, we'll come back for a rule development workshop. If everything goes forward, we're hoping for board approval on June 14th, 2022, and they will become effective once approved.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair,
Yes.
if I may. So because we have so many policies and they are not, in most instances, closely related, I do believe we will stop after each segment for discussion rather than taking notes and trying to get through them all. I think that would just be less productive because there's such a volume here. So after each session, each segment, we will actually stop for your discussion and input.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. I think that's a wise idea. I want to mention that while we have a schedule, depending on how far we get today and what type of feedback we get from board members, it is possible that we might have to come back for another work session on some of these if we don't conclude everything we need to conclude. All right? Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. So today we're going to be presenting JCA, Assignment of Students to School. That's going to be your student transfers policy. JFBD, Magnet School Programs. JICI, which is a new policy regarding firearms and weapons in school and on board property. JICK, which is your threats policy, and that's pertaining to threat assessment teams, threats of harm to others, and threats of self-harm. JLF, reporting child abuse, child protection. JLIE, student automobile use. JJ, extracurricular activities. And KBBA, parental rights and responsibilities. And that's going to be the policy that pertains to custodial rights in school. So it is named that after the NEPN classification system, but I just want to clarify that that's not pertaining to the Parental Bill of Rights. So this is a different policy. And one more note before I turn it over, throughout our policies, we are changing anywhere it says parent to parent/legal guardian. So you will see that throughout the red lines. We may not mention it as we go through the presentation, but I just want to make you aware that that is a major change that we made. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Moody and Ms. Neal to review the JCA assignment of students to school.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. Stacy Neal will walk us through JCA assignments of students to schools. Ms. Neal?
Good morning. JCA assignment of students to school. Purpose. JCA is being revised to update available transfers for OCPS students. Action summary. Revisions have been made to the existing policy language to include content, formatting, and terminology edits consistent with statutory language. Purpose and definitions. Language is added to include families outside of Orange County, as some of the transfers apply to non-Orange County residents. The proposed revision reads, the School Board of Orange County, Florida, Board, shall provide a mechanism for student transfer for families that reside in Orange County, Florida, or if applicable, and as specifically referenced herein, outside of Orange County. Also under purpose and definitions, this revision allows for the superintendent or designee to transfer a student and adds reference to Florida statutes, board policies JICK and JIC, and the Student Code of Conduct. The proposed revision reads, it is also important to note that the superintendent or designee may transfer a student to another school or program located outside of the student's assigned school for health, safety, or welfare of the student, other students, or staff in accordance with applicable Florida statutes, board policy JICK titled Threats, board policy JIC titled Code of Student Conduct, and the Code of Student Conduct Handbook. Change of address is a title. This revision separates the provisions related to the student's change of address. Revocation, the title's added here. This revision separates the provisions relating to the revocation of a transfer and adds revocation as the title to the subsection. Revocation exception for 21-22 school year. We removed the language that was added during COVID that saved the transfer seat for the 2021-2022 school year, as it is no longer applicable. John McKay Program, title and reference. The revision changes the name of John McKay Scholarship to the new title, Family Empowerment Scholarship for Students with Unique Abilities, FES-UA, to reflect new statute language. John McKay Scholarship Eligibility. Additional revisions under FES-UA, formerly McKay. This section is modified to align with Section 1002.394, Florida statutes, and reads, the state of Florida offers the FES-UA scholarship, which allows guardians of qualifying students with disabilities to enroll an eligible student in another school within OCPS. Students enrolled pursuant to the OCPS school choice plan and the receiving school's ability to appropriately implement the student's individual education plan.
If I can interrupt for a second, Dr. Jenkins, you want us to get all the way through these and then come back?
Actually, just one policy at a time.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Okay,
Yes.
okay.
Okay. Magnet, more information. We included a reference to Board Policy JFBD titled Magnet School Programs. Staff transfer, on-site versus off-site. The section is modified to separate the two types of employees, those that work at a particular school and those that work at a facility. Staff transfer, next nearest qualified school. We added the language to state the next nearest qualified school is determined by the Office of Student Enrollment. Staff transfer, magnet. Current language states, students of OCPS staff do not qualify for an OCPS staff transfer to schools that are solely magnet schools. The OCPS staff member must apply to the magnet school through the magnet school application process as detailed in this policy. This section is revised to allow OCPS employees to use a staff transfer to a magnet school. The proposed revision reads, students of OCPS staff may qualify for an OCPS staff transfer to schools that are solely magnet schools, if at the time of application, the magnet school can appropriately implement the student's IEP, if applicable, and/or if the application is for the Orlando Gifted Academy, the student is eligible for gifted services. Grandfathered transfer. Regarding grandfathered transfer, the language has been modified and reformatted for clarification. Hope Scholarship, transfer time frame. The reference to the 2018-2019 school year is removed as it is no longer applicable. Open seat, transfer time frame. We are revising the transfer time frame to allow families to apply for the open seat transfer earlier in the school year. The new time frame is September 1st through March 15th. Also under open seat transfer, we modified the term capacity to seats. And that will conclude JCA.
Okay, thank you. Without seeing anyone else wishing to speak, I have a number of questions. If we can go to, and I don't have the slide number, if we can go to the transfers, what is this? Sorry. Excuse me, under revocations. Sorry, after revocations, under number 6, transfers. Guardians can request a transfer. Under Roman numeral 3, eligibility, I've got 2 questions there. We use the term disabilities, and I noticed that the state is using unique abilities, and so I'm just wanting to understand, are we going to continue to use disabilities in our policy, or are we going to adapt to using the term unique abilities? And it's just a question.
Sarah, I'll have to answer.
So while the state is using unique abilities for this statute, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is still the prevailing law for federal law in terms of students with disabilities. So my recommendation would be to continue using the language that is enumerated in IDEA in everything that is not specifically stated in statute as something else.
Great.
Which is why we did use, if you see, it says FESUA, but on the next page, when we talk about the student, it does say, in accordance with their individual education plan. We didn't say their unique ability plan, for instance. We kept the language that was in federal law there to be consistent.
Okay, excellent answer, thank you. Further down in this same section, the sentence that reads, students enrolled pursuant to the OCPS school choice plan and the receiving school's ability to appropriately implement the student's IEP, period. I don't understand that sentence because it's not a complete sentence.
Well, the reason that it was written that way is that we often have students, for instance, if we have a student that is in a unit, and if they then ask for an FESUA scholarship, and that scholarship is to a school that does not have a unit, that school would then not be able to appropriately implement their IEP, and therefore you could not request a scholarship to a school that cannot serve the child based upon their IEP. So school choice needs to look at, one, their school choice criteria as to what's available, and then also make sure that the school we're sending the student to can actually serve them.
So I think my question is more simple,
Okay.
and maybe I'm misreading this. I just don't think that's a sentence. Students enrolled pursuant to the OCPS school choice plan and the receiving school's ability to appropriately implement the student's IEP plan.
So we could add something that says students will be enrolled pursuant to the OCPS school choice plan and the receiving school's ability to appropriately implement the IEP.
Yes, thank you. That's what I was missing when I read it.
Yes, I am.
And Chair, we appreciate these comments because we've looked at these backwards, forwards,
Yes.
upside down. So having an extra set of eyes is very, very helpful.
And please know,
Yes.
ma'am, I was answering the question based on that.
Absolutely.
Because we
So-
have gone through this so many times and don't see the grammar
I was
anymore.
joking around with the superintendent yesterday about if anybody wants to know what value I bring to the school board, I'm pretty good at catching typos. Unless, of course, they're my own, in which case it's a lost cause. It's very, very frustrating when you dwell on these things and then you send out a letter of your own that's full of them. So I look for you all to catch my typos too. It's a team sport here. Opportunity. I have a note here. I don't understand what an opportunity scholarship transfer. Can you explain to me what an opportunity scholarship transfer, an example of an opportunity scholarship transfer?
So the Opportunity Scholarship Transfer was in place when a school has, I think, 3 years D or 1 year F, and then the student is allowed to transfer to a higher performance school.
Okay, thank you. So under A, and this comment here will come up over and over again. The term, the phrase that we use, the student must stay for the school year unless there's a change of address. I would suggest that we change that language to say that the student may not transfer to another OCPS during the school, another OCPS school during the school year, unless, rather than must stay, because I mean, realistically, a student doesn't have to stay. A student could go to Orange County Virtual, they could move, they could homeschool, they have various options. So I think that the term that they must stay is not exactly accurate. And since it's a policy, it's rather important. So
Can you read that again? I have the
Yeah.
student may not transfer to another. that's where I
OCPS
lost.
school during the school year unless there is a change of address. But when I say that, I think we need to figure out if that includes, can they go to OCBS? Can they go to Orange County Virtual? So that may not be perfect language. But if we could get to something about what they're not allowed to do rather than that they have to be in the school. And then I'll just, again, it comes
So-
up quite frequently.
Chair, is it okay if I just explain if a student accepts a transfer, the purpose was for them to remain at the transfer school. However, they could go back to their zone school, or they could apply to go to OCPS or Florida Virtual School or withdraw.
Right, yeah, I was pretty sure I knew what the intent was, but the language is a little,
Gotcha.
doesn't exactly reflect that intent. The other comment I have here, these are a little on the nitpicky side, but again, it's a policy, so being really clear, I think, is important. Under C, siblings are not eligible to transfer with the student who has granted the opportunity scholarship transfer unless the sibling meets the same criteria contained herein. And I agree with that, but I was kind of almost wondering, does that need to be there? I don't guess it does any harm to have it there, but. Oh, and then I had a follow-up note I see here. If the scholarships are because of poor performance of the school, why wouldn't all siblings be allowed to transfer?
I'm sorry.
If the scholarships are because of the poor performance of the school that they're in, then why wouldn't all siblings be eligible to transfer?
So they would be allowed to apply if they are all attending the same school. But we have, so sibling is referenced. We actually have a ESE sibling transfer, but we do reference sibling transfers throughout the whole policy, just so that it's consistent language, and parents know that if a student their sibling does not qualify, then the sibling is not able to transfer also, just because they're the sibling of. They have to meet the criteria of the specific transfer.
Okay, I see Member Byrd and Member Colbert have comments, and I've got a number more on here, so why don't I break, and we'll hear from Vice Chair Byrd and then from Member Colbert. Vice Chair, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. My question has to do with the sibling transfers. I understand that, or I see in this policy that in several of the different categories, sibling transfers are not available. There are a couple that they are, and then my question is, why is that? I understand if the school is overcrowded, obviously, but if it's not severely overcrowded, I'm just trying to understand why we don't allow siblings to also receive consideration. And the reason I'm asking is because I get asked this question a lot. And as a parent of two kids that have often been in separate schools, it's very difficult. And it's especially difficult if you are working parents. Trying to get, especially if they're both in elementary or they're both in middle school, they're both in high school, trying to get kids to two different schools at the same time can almost be nearly impossible and causes a lot of struggle on families, and then trying to, and oftentimes the transfers aren't even taken because the logistics of it can't even be worked out. So I'm trying to understand why there can't be a line like what is in the open enrollment sibling section, letter I, that says, so long as the school has an available seat for the sibling. Can someone explain to me why we don't allow siblings to transfer with their sibling?
So, for example, if we have a psychological transfer and student A is the one that is having the issues, then it's specific to that student for the transfer. So, of course, we do not want students in schools that are experiencing any type of psychological, compelling psychological issue. So we offer the transfer for that student. So the sibling, if they are thriving and not, have any psychological issues or circumstances, then they wouldn't meet the criteria to be transferred. That's why we said if the sibling meets the same criteria, then of course we would transfer both students. However, if only one is experiencing, then we transfer based off of the psychological or the medical situation. And if the parent would like to look into, that's why we came out with open seat transfer, so that we would be able to accommodate siblings in those types of situations. And that's why we've opened the open seat transfer to earlier, to have more time earlier in the school year to accommodate those types of situations per board before.
Vice Chair, I want to make sure you were able to hear. Were you able to hear?
Yes, I can hear.
Okay. Did that answer your questions?
Yes, I just think that it's, I don't know. I just think it's kind of an extra step. I know for some parents that have reached out to me, it's been recommended that they apply for a psychological transfer, because that's really the only transfer that usually will, that they can that will possibly work. But doing a psychological transfer is not an easy process, as it probably should be. But it's a lot of extra steps when I think that I feel like we could be a little more accommodating to our parents and try to help make situations easier. If a parent is needs to make a choice for one of their children because of some situation that's not working for that child, and if it's a situation that we could do something to make the whole situation easier for the family, I just feel like it could be a little easier.
So, Vice Chair, if I can paraphrase what I hear you saying is, you understand the explanation that's been given. You would prefer that the board consider a change to this policy so that we would amend this language to say something to the effect that if there is a sibling in the same school, and there is capacity in the receiving school, that opportunity be available to the sibling. I think you're suggesting, as this is the time to do that if we want to look at a change in policy, something like that would be something you would support.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So we'll need some board discussion, but let me turn first to the superintendent, if you want to respond to
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm understanding clearly. So the open enrollment says for anyone who is interested in a seat. Let's say we have a child who is going to the IB program at Winter Park High School, and they want the siblings to go along with that child. Member Byrd, I want to make sure I'm understanding your preference. You'd like to say if there are additional seats there, they are not open enrollment seats to anyone who wants to get into Winter Park High School, but it would be first preference to someone who has a child in the magnet program and wants the sibling to be granted attending there as well, giving them priority. Is that correct?
Actually, that was not really what I was referring to, but that is another point that I wanted to make as well.
I just want to make sure we're understanding, because we're trying to take
Yes.
notes here. I'm sorry.
Yes, no, that's fine. That was actually another note that I had on this, was that siblings of magnet students could also get first priority, because that's again is another issue where it can be very difficult if you have one child. And this actually happened to a friend of mine this year. Her one child's in Howard. The other child did not get into Howard going into 6th grade. So now she's going to have 2 kids in 2 separate middle schools, which is just extremely difficult to handle. So now she has to make a decision about what she's doing. So that is definitely one thing. I'm thinking more of, let me think of a situation. Okay, I had one that a parent, their child is going to use the grandfathered in clause to have their child stay in a school for 5th grade, but then the other child is being zoned to a new school. So the only way she could keep that other child that's being zoned to the new school in the current school is obviously to she was told to do a psychological transfer, or try to do a psychological transfer, but there's really not a psychological reason. It's just that now she'll have two kids in two separate elementary schools. So I think those are the kinds of situations I'm talking about, where one child will have one of these transfers is available to them, but the other one is not. Is that clear?
So in essence, if there is room in the school, whatever the program, whatever the transfer, and those seats would be available for open enrollment, give priority to siblings first, regardless of the reason for the transfer. I'm trying to figure out how we can write it in policy. Would that cover both your examples?
Yes, probably.
Okay. Thank you, Madam.
Okay. And Dr. Jenkins, before we, I think we'll want to hear from the board on the issue. And we're so short on board members right this minute, but let me just, we have a number of people that are either on the call or here. Before we go, Member Colbert, to a different subject, do you want to speak to this? And I have Member Gould is on the line. She may want to speak to this issue, as well as Member Lopez. Thank you.
Okay. I concur with Member Byrd for reasons of like a psychological or medical transfer, that would absolutely make it easier on the family, because a sibling would be going into the general population. I'm more hesitant for a magnet sibling. Now, if a magnet student were going to a specific program at a high school, and maybe the sibling would go into the general population, I can see that. But I'm hesitant in the case of like a Howard Middle School. That's a magnet for the performing arts. That sibling may not necessarily be interested in the performing arts. That's a very specific program. So into the general population, to assist a family, keep them together, I can see that. But I have pause on entering siblings as priority into a magnet program.
Understood. Dr. Jenkins, you're following that as well, right? Okay, let's go to Member Gould, and then we'll go to Member Lopez.
So I just wanted to also express my agreement that where it makes sense and it's possible to transfer siblings, not necessarily into the magnet program as Member Hobart said, but to the same school if we have the ability. I would that I've run into this so many times over the years. And it is truly hard on families when we do want to offer as much choice or accommodate a need, whether it's, bullying or they're not clicking with a teacher. And it would be much better if all of the kids could go to the same school whenever possible.
Okay, and Member Lopez.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Member Gould as well. I think that sometimes separating them is something that, number one, for them, for the students psychologically is gonna affect them, and number two, it will be more work for the parents. I think that we're here to support our families. I think that type of policy can provide that accommodation, and at the end, it will be good for the students. They will be more successful academically as well. And also, I have a question. Do we have any policy that is based on psychological transfer only, not related to the Hope Scholarship, not because of bullying? Is because, do we have one?
It's called the psychological transfer.
And is not in this in the policies that we're it's not in
No,
GCA?
it's there. It should be there.
Section J.
Section.
J?
You gotta look on the BoardDocs, Johanna.
Because it's here.
There were no changes recommended there.
It'd be page 9 of the red line. Member Lopez.
In that specific case, they can be transferred to any school, or they can be transferred based on capacity?
So the transfer itself is to the next nearest qualified school, so based on their residence. So we don't send them all over the county. We try to keep them in their general location to the next nearest qualified school, to their home.
Okay, perfect. Okay, that will be all. Thank you.
Yes, and are you?
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And capacity is taken into consideration. However, if the school is over capacity, we will transfer into the school. We just try not when the school is grossly over capacity, but it's still possible. So we take all that criteria we look into it to make sure that we're not creating a worse situation for the school.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, so let me do this. What I was trying to do was follow the path of Member Byrd's suggestion all the way to its end before we went down a different path. On Byrd's, okay, and mine is too. So go ahead, Member Colbert, and then Member Colbert, I am going to come back to you because I think you had a different issue.
So I see under psychological transfers, under F, that's where it specifically says siblings are not eligible to transfer with the student who is granted the psychological transfer unless the sibling meets the same criteria contained herein. I think that's where we can make a change to say that they are eligible with capacity. So it would be an F under psychological transfers.
Yeah, and I think the direction the superintendent might be going with that is that they would be eligible under open enrollment and have priority. You with us, Member Colbert? So there would be two different ways to get there, that you could simply say that they're eligible, or you could have under open enrollment a priority for students who are siblings. So different ways to get there, but I think as long as we can get there, we will be good. I have one concern. I'm generally in support of the direction we're going. The one caveat would be, so a parent has a first grader and a fifth grader, and the fifth grader, because of rezoning for that neighborhood, the fifth grader is grandfathered in. And now we tell the first grader can stay with the fifth grader because we're going to keep them both at the same school. Or let's say it's not a first grader, it's a third grader. And so now what happens is the third grader, the next year, when the fifth grader goes to sixth grade, the third grader is now going to transfer to the school they're supposed to be in while they're in fourth grade. And they're going to spend
They stay. You're talking about the third grader?
Yeah.
Once they have the transfer is for the duration of the grade. So if
Okay,
it's
so
K
the
through
fifth
5.
grader isn't transferred, the fifth grader is grandfathered.
The fifth grader is grandfathered, and then if you're asking for the third grader to stay under a sibling type transfer, then the third grader is there even after the fifth grader goes to middle school.
Okay, what I was anticipating was the way this was going to work out is that the third grader at fourth grade would have to go, or could even be a fourth grade and a fifth grade, and then the fourth grader is leaving in the fifth grade year. But you're saying no, once you have this privilege of staying in this different, out of zone to school, you're there for the duration.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that answers that question. Let's go to Member Colbert.
Thank you, Chair. So on page 10 of the red line, under OCPS staff transfers, in C, students of OCPS staff may qualify for an OCPS staff transfer to schools that are solely magnet schools if at the time of the application the magnet school can appropriately implement the student's IEP, if applicable, or the application is for the Orlando Gifted Academy. The student is eligible for gifted services. So what I want to ensure is that that's not the only reason that they may transfer. So my example would be a teacher that works at a school that's a magnet program. I think, again, going back to doing things for families and for our employees, I want to make sure that that's not the only reason that their child might be able to transfer to the school.
So for clarification, so we're doing the staff on site for magnet schools solely. So for example, I work at Howard, I can bring my student to Howard. But if I work at Orlando Gifted, because it's Orlando Gifted, they have to have an IEP that meets the criteria to attend.
Okay.
Or EP, sorry, EP to attend Orlando Gifted. So that's why that section is put in there for Orlando Gifted.
Okay, so it doesn't prohibit, if I'm a teacher at Hillcrest or Howard, it does not prohibit me from asking for a staff transfer?
Correct.
Okay,
You're correct.
that's what I wanted to make sure.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Vice Chair, or I'm sorry, not Vice Chair. Member Gould, you're recognized. Because I'm not sure if you were queuing in on the conversation started by Vice Chair Byrd or for another matter.
Sorry, that was an old cue.
Okay, thank you. Member Lopez, you were queuing in, I think, on the other. Is there anything else?
Yes, I just have a question. And with the seniors in high school, you know, maybe it's 1 month and maybe the family moved to another address. Do we have any type of time frame for seniors not to be transferred?
Yes, ma'am. We have what's called the rising transfer, but that's for all rising fifth graders, rising eighth graders, and rising seniors. And even after they move, we have a transfer that's in place. Look, I'll stay with that first. So if they move anytime after or before their fourth grade year, fifth grade year, eighth grade year, senior year, they can apply to remain at the school as long as they are in county. The next one is, let's say they move after they've started their senior year or eighth grade year or fifth grade year, they can apply for what's called an academic year completion transfer, which allows them to remain and finish the school year.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, question. I'm on academic transfer, D, Roman numeral 4G. Transfers may be revoked pursuant to section 3E above, or the student's course grade is below C, or overall GPA is below 2.0. Question here is, I think this is the exact language that we have in 3E above, and I wasn't sure why we needed to say it twice. And there may not be any harm in saying it twice, but I just wasn't sure if it's saying the same thing, why the need to put it in there.
I think that was an edit we made recently, just for consistency. Chair, could you tell me again where you're looking?
So I'm under academic transfer, under conditions, Roman numeral 4, and under G. Transfers may be revoked pursuant to section 3E above,
Page 5, kind of mid-page.
or the student's course grade is below C, or overall GPA is below 2.
Okay.
Took me a little, because when I read it, I knew I had already read it. And so when I got to it and read it and saw that I thought it said the same thing, and I just didn't know why.
So for this section, the reason you have the additional wording is because grade level or GPA is added to this condition or this transfer, since it is an academic transfer. The reason the student would remain or be transferred to a school is because of academics. So aside from discipline, attendance, this one takes in consideration if they fall below a certain GPA or grade.
Okay, so that is not in 3E, the grade point average. Okay.
Right, correct.
Under controlled open enrollment, a question there, is that once you've transferred, you stay for the remainder of that school?
Yes,
Right,
so
okay.
K through 5, 6 through 8,
Okay,
9 through 12,
okay,
unless it's a K-8.
okay. And then I'm not going to point out each case, but each time that we have the student must stay for the school year, if we could look for language that is, I'm going to say, a bit more accurate. I can tell you I'm on page, but that doesn't really help very much. Based on what the red line copy, I'm on page 3. I'm sorry, page 8, documentation from, okay. I'm under medical, H medical, under eligibility, and under A. It says documentation from a physician is required and may be reviewed by OCPS designated medical staff. So I wasn't sure when I read that. I get that it may be reviewed, but to what end? What I was trying to figure out, does that mean that our medical director may review it and say, this
Correct.
is not valid?
Correct. So for the most severe situations, such as, if you say to us, your child is a hemophiliac, I'm not saying that's the worst, but I'm just saying something to that effect. And we know in our office that there's not a nurse or a nearby hospital or a fire station, then we will grant the transfer. Depending on the situation, we're able to assess it. However, but there are certain medical conditions that are, out of our realm. So then we will defer to our medical department team, John Zarega, or someone to let us know if the school can accommodate or if the situation is such that the child must be moved, and then to where.
Okay, so the medical staff, I guess what I'm thinking back to is going back to the mask policy. When we had the medical director reviewing the letters from doctors that wanted exemptions for medical reasons, and our medical director had the right to review those letters and to reject them and make a final determination. So I'm trying to figure out, does this language mean that the medical staff can make a different determination, or that they just have the right to review it? And if they're just reviewing it, what are they reviewing it for?
So to the extent of our transfers, is for them to review and advise or on placement. So like I said, none of ours have been such where, I guess, like I said, if it's a matter of is a nurse or RN at the school as opposed to an LPN or a healthcare clinic assistant for that child's situation, then they would tell us, okay, well, school A doesn't have a RN in the student's condition because it's not maintained or they've been seen so many times for this condition, then we're going to suggest the next nearest school that has an RN, and then they will tell us where the RN is located.
So the purpose of this review may be reviewed by OCPS designated medical staff for the purpose of determining appropriate placement. That's what we're trying to do. Not for the purpose of determining whether the doctor's correct.
In some circumstances, ma'am, we do have a situation where we are concerned if the paperwork is truly stating what the student needs. That's why we also have our medical director, and then we will get consent from the parent to work with that family to see if there's a way to either keep the child at the school that they're at or move them over. It's incredibly rare that we have a physician state that a student needs such a high level of medical care that they truly don't need. It's very rare. It does happen sometimes, in which case we do need to address it and have our nurses work with their doctors and have our doctor work with their doctor. But in most cases, this is truly because we have a student, for instance, that requires a medication, for instance, some of our students that have seizures require medications that need to be administered by an RN, and they can't be administered by anything but an RN. And if the school does not have one, then we need to move the student to a school that does, so that we can make sure that the student, if they have their medical episode, can be treated safely and quickly.
Okay, so I'm still back to, when they review this, are they reviewing it for the purpose of determining where that student should go? Or are they reviewing it for to determine whether or not that is an accurate medical diagnosis? And whichever the case is, I prefer this sentence be a little more clear. Dr. Jenkins?
So potentially it could say for approval or for verification or for consultation. I mean, we need something after reviewed by medical staff for something. So, Ms. Corwin, would you say
I
for
would recommend
verification?
for verification and determination of the and we could go from there for verification and determination of the appropriate school location to serve the student.
Okay. That would answer, if it's answering my question, then it's going to be answering somebody else's question down the road who says, you get to review it, but you don't get to do squat with it. I was more concerned that this was about challenging the doctor, and if we feel like we need to do that, then we need to have in this policy the ability to do that, and it didn't seem to say that. The last one, E, under this same section, siblings of a student granted a medical transfer may also apply for a medical transfer to the same school. A little confused there, because obviously any sibling that's eligible for a medical transfer is eligible for a medical transfer. And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, a sibling that's not eligible for a medical transfer under this new approach that we might take might still have a priority under open enrollment, or might be eligible for a transfer to this school because their sibling is there. But in this
Chair.
case, we're talking about two students who both have medical issues. Yes.
So if I may,
Yeah.
same thing with a lot of the sibling transfers, we just want to make sure that it's understood that you may have a medical condition or an IEP that a school may not, the same school may not be able to accommodate. So we do have to keep that in mind.
Right, so you could have two children in one family that have two medical conditions, and they can't necessarily go to the same school, because that two different schools might need to serve whatever their medical need is. But it says they may also apply for a medical transfer to the same school. They may apply for a medical transfer, but they may not get it.
Of course, we will try to meet.
Yeah. Which brings me back to, I don't know why we need this sentence.
Okay.
Just because if I have two children and they stand alone, both of them should be able to apply. Yeah?
Yeah, I got it. You got it? Okay.
So would you like the similar language to what we discussed before with some of the other transfers where the sibling may be eligible based on availability, capacity?
Well, I think we're going to include this under that, but
But-
in this case, it seems like we're talking about
Of medical.
two children who have
Medical.
medical conditions that
If
are
I-
seeking a medical transfer. And it would seem like with or without this sentence,
Right.
that student would still be eligible to transfer to maybe this is here because if there's, the same school could handle both of those students, that they would be able to apply to go to that same school. Maybe that's the purpose of having it here.
So I can actually explain why that one's there.
Great.
So a couple years ago, we came and we added the sibling portion to each policy section as to how it applies to siblings. Under the medical transfer, you don't have to have a medical condition to apply for a sibling transfer. So if one child needs the medical transfer, I can also apply for their siblings to go. So that was us just delineating which ones a sibling can actually apply for and automatically get, as opposed to the ones that they can't. But if we're going to be changing it for all policies, I think that's just where the confusion comes in, because we were saying in this one it doesn't apply, but in this one it does. Does that make sense?
Yes, so what, then to be more clear about what this was supposed to say, siblings of a student granted a medical transfer who do not have a medical condition may also apply for a medical transfer to the same school.
Yes.
That's what we were talking about.
Yes.
Gotcha. I did not read that at all. I read that they could apply for a medical transfer, which told me they still had to have a medical justification. That's the plain English language interpretation of that. So we definitely need to clear that up, regardless if that's what it's supposed to say. And if we're going to change all this, that addresses it. But,
I see the difference would be.
okay.
Right.
All right, I'm going to keep going. I am under psychological. Psychological C, Roman numeral 3, eligibility C. Psychological transfers are to the next nearest qualified school or to remain at the current school. I was confused about or to remain. So if it's a transfer?
So what would happen is they have moved and they're asking to remain at the school for whatever reasons. And we have
okay.
situations, for example, I've had parents pass away and another parent or family member.
Got it, which would no longer be the zone school, but the school that they're, understood. I couldn't understand what that was supposed to mean. I'm close, guys. Okay, this is a question where I think I'd like us to have a different policy. So I'm on pending move, M, pending move, eligibility A. Or actually just under eligibility, a pending move allows a student to attend a school of the guardian's future residence domicile when the move or closing date, or as the case may be, is within 60 days. The following applies. Both the current and prospective addresses must be located in Orange County, Florida. I think we had one of these. So we have a renter. They're living in Osceola County, and they purchased a home in South Orange, and they want to start their student in the school year in the home that they're going to move. But technically, they don't qualify because they live in Osceola County, not Orange County. So,
Correct. Based on the original school board policy under definitions, it did state you must be an Orange County resident to apply for transfers.
Well, that's what it still says, and that's one thing I would like to suggest in all of this. Most of my stuff is just cleaning up or clarifying, but in this case, I think if the family the guardian can prove that they are contractually obligated to move into a school zone in Orange County, that the fact that they're in Lake County or Osceola County, or for that matter, even say they're moving down from New York and they know they are closing on a house and they're going to rent a hotel for 3 weeks while their house is becoming available, I still want that kid to be able to start school. And we've had a couple since I've been here where I think we've made that work, but I don't like making something work that's against a policy, because there's not like a waiver of policies. You can't declare that emergency, so I'd rather see us change this language. Dr. Jenkins, before I poll the board.
I agree. I think we can simply say that the address of the home they're about to close on with evidence is in Orange County is sufficient. And nowadays, it used to be more strict about crossing county lines. That is not the case anymore, so I think it would be that would be fine.
Okay. Yeah, and for the board or the public's benefit, each time when we're talking about a substantive change, I'm going to the superintendent first, because it always occurs to me that there may be some thing that I or the board members are not understanding historically that we would want to understand before having a discussion. So thank you for that.
And for the revision team, if I may piggyback off of that, there might be then changes needed to C and D. Because it says if the family doesn't move.
Board feedback on that issue. Member Colbert.
I agree. As I've said with the other changes to policy, we need to make this easy for families. And I have seen or been asked about situations where specifically someone is building a home and they know they're going to be moving in, even if it's within 6 months, and please, please, can my children start school there? I think we should make that accommodation, whether they live in Orange County or not.
Yeah, there's a good point. The 60 days may be a narrower window than is necessary. Member Lopez?
I agree 100%.
Okay,
Member Colbert.
okay. Anybody on the call that wants to chime in? If we don't hear from you, we're going to assume you're okay with that change.
I completely agree as well. Whatever we can do to make things easier for our families, I think is a better choice.
Okay. And then, Amy Sembol, you mentioned C, if the family doesn't move by the date provided, the student will be moved to the originally zoned school. We would need to change that.
Because it might be, we can't move them then to us.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think we need to look at what that language looks like. Yes.
Madam Chair, so I think we have to be less stringent because now there are provisions for crossing county lines.
Mm-hmm.
If the student remains with us, we get credit for FTE, which would make our CFO quite happy.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't need to be as stringent around a student from out of the district because we would still get credit for FTE.
Right. I think what we want to do is make sure that this isn't so loosey-goosey that it becomes a way around the open enrollment process. And so perhaps we lengthen that period of time. I think what we do if the family hasn't moved by that date is that the family would have to produce documentation to explain. It could very easily be a case of, and today's a great example, I have a friend who is building a house and it is so many months behind schedule because of supply chain issues. So it could be that the house isn't closing as quickly as they expected, and we certainly don't want to be removing them from the school. So I think we need documentation under C if the family does not move by the date, and I think D is probably fine, but we'll leave it to you all to take a look at what needs to be done there to
We'll
make
take
that work.
care of it. And just so I'm clear, I don't want anybody who might be listening to think there is open enrollment for any school, because the issue would be if the school is at or above capacity already. That
Absolutely.
crossing of the county line is a provision when we have schools that are below their capacity, just to be clear.
Right. My fear was that if we keep this too loose, you could have somebody saying, well, as long as there's no controls, I can go to any school I want in Orange County if I just say I'm moving there. But I would expand the 60 days. It was a suggestion of 6 months. I don't know what that ideal time frame is. Member Colbert, you have some thoughts on that?
I think with the appropriate documentation, which can be a signed lease or a signed contract for purchase of home or whatever dwelling. So I think that just with proper documentation, I don't think we need that time limit. I know people who are supposed to move into a home in September, and now they're telling them, look for after the first of the year. But if you can provide appropriate documentation, I do want them to be a part of that school community for which they would be zoned.
Okay. All right. So we have a recommendation that we just delete the number of days.
If I may make a suggestion.
Absolutely.
We do have some families that either their closing falls through, perhaps they don't move in, perhaps they get a lease in our county just so that way their child can attend a specific school. So we do have situations where this, as you're explaining it, doesn't play out quite that way. And so if possible, I'd like to keep the timeline and then just offer in some additional language that maybe if it's delayed, then documented proof that it was delayed or something along those lines. Just because I feel like if we remove the timeline, we're going to have parents continue to push it and say, well, it was pushed back another 6 months, it's pushed back another 6 months. And without requiring any such proof, we would have to then allow them to remain in that particular school, whereas we have open seat transfers where they can go to a school at capacity, but say they were coming to move into Bridgewater, I believe is over capacity. So they're moving to the Bridgewater zone, and so we were going to allow them to go there, even though it's over capacity because it's a pending move transfer. I just have concerns that we would then be allowing people in without requiring some sort of documented proof that it's an ongoing build or something like that.
Okay, so Dr. Jenkins had suggested 90 days, but that doesn't, that 90 days doesn't, isn't finite. So if somebody is building a house and there is a delay in the closure date, that would still roll over. Your concern was a case where it's a lease?
Lease or even a building. We've had situations where families have said, I bought this house, they're building it, and then come to find out they never move there because maybe they pull out on the contract or something like that. And they do that just so they can get in the school zone. So my concern is that if we remove any sort of timeline to give them,
Got it.
then, and without requiring additional documented proof to extend that timeline, then we may just be opening the floodgates.
All right, so if it were 90 days, and if they have not moved into the zone school within 90 days, that they would have to provide documentation acceptable by the district, that there are extenuating circumstances that have delayed their move, but they are still intending to move in. Okay. Okay, maybe within the next 90 days or something, so that there's a constant, or 60 days, or whatever you guys want to come up with. Okay, that's all I've got on that one. I think that was my most comments. Hopefully it'll go quicker from here, folks. Thank you. Let's go.
Next policy.
All right, next policy.
Okay, get out of the way.
Is the next policy magnet?
Next policy is magnet, yes,
Great.
ma'am.
Great.
So, good afternoon, and joining me will be Dr. Kim Marlowe, who works with magnet programs. The purpose for today, JFBD is being revised to update and clarify magnet school and magnet program requirements for OCPS students. And the action summary, revisions have been made to the existing policy language to include content formatting and terminology edits consistent with statutory language. And under the title, purpose and title, we added the titles to stay within OCPS policy formatting. The title purpose is proposed. And again, under purpose, this section is modified to align with the other board policies to include Orange County Public Schools. This section also clarifies the educational purpose of magnet programs and magnet schools. Types of magnet schools and magnet programs. This section is modified to reflect both current magnet schools for elementary and middle school. The proposed revision clarifies magnet schools have been made at the elementary and middle school levels and specialty magnet programs at the high school level. This also provides for future total school and or specialty programs at any level. Recruitment. The entire section is revised to reflect that the magnet programs and magnet schools each create an annual recruitment plan with the assistance of school choice services. Academic or related eligibility criteria for elementary. This section is modified to allow select schools to use criteria as a determinant factor for elementary students. And this is specifically for OGA. And it reads, the proposed revision reads, at the elementary level, no school shall use academic or related criteria for determining whether a student is eligible for a magnet school or magnet program, with the exception of Orlando Gifted Academy as detailed here within. And in addition to academic or related eligibility for elementary, parents has been modified to parents/guardians, and magnet agreement has been added to contracts. Put your mic closer to you.
For academic or related eligibility criteria, The language is modified to allow for oversight on new requirements after review by the Office of School Choice Services. Revision adds the word considered for any new requirements submitted by a principal. That second section, application, selection, and admission process timeline, the language is revised to allow for flexibility for application dates. It reads between November 1 and February 15 of each school year, or the first school day following November 1 and February 15, if these days fall on a non-school day. The Office of School Choice Services shall make applications for magnet schools and magnet programs available online. In this section, application selection, admission process, OCPS employees, this subsection is modified to require that the student as well as the parent reside in Orange County and to provide an out-of-county exemption for OCPS employees to apply. It would read, the student, parent, and legal guardian of a student must reside in Orange County, Florida at the time of application, with the exception of the following. The student of a parent and legal guardian who is a current OCPS employee and who does not reside in Orange County is eligible for consideration to enter the lottery, which may result in admission to a magnet school or magnet program. If the parent or legal guardian is no longer employed by OCPS and the student is not a resident of Orange County at the time of the non-employment, the student will be withdrawn from the magnet school or magnet program at the end of the school year. On this slide at the top, application selection and admission process for high school eligibility. One change has been made in this section is modified placement, the word placement, to seat offers. In the middle section, the requirement to meet the comprehensive assessment testing standards is removed, and the section is modified to apply to applicants from outside the district. The proposed revision reads, applicants outside the district shall be required to establish on-grade level abilities and determine application eligibility. That final section, the term randomized, is now added to describe the lottery process of the 40% seats. On this slide, application selection admission process high school eligibility, this section is modified to clarify the GPA is the final GPA for each year and to remove the priority given for certain courses. We do not use weighted GPAs, and it is an important clarification for rising ninth graders that we use their final 6th and 7th grade report card, as we cannot use an 8th grade report card in the middle of the 8th grade year. Application selection admission process for middle school eligibility. The requirement to meet the comprehensive assessment testing standards is removed, and the priority given for certain courses is also removed. It is also modified to express at the time of application an Orlando Gifted Academy applicant must be as a gifted student and receiving services via an educational plan implemented in the state of Florida. As a note, the FSA Level 3 or higher gatekeeper has not been used for over 5 years. On this next slide, application selection and admission process for elementary school eligibility. Language is added to the state that at the time of application, an Orlando Gifted Academy applicant must be eligible as a gifted student and receiving services via an educational plan implemented in the state of Florida pursuant to Florida law and administrative code laws. In that bottom section, this section is modified to remove the term student placement, also to change the term fill to offer, and states that relevant information will be posted on the Office of School Choice Services website.
In the section assignment preferences, military families, language is added to this section in accordance with section 1003.05 Florida statutes requiring military families to receive first preference for admission to magnet schools or magnet programs. On this page also, assignment preferences for siblings. Language is added to extend the elementary sibling preference to Orlando Gifted Academy. And on slide 25, weight pool, wait lists. This section is modified for clarification, and the term assignment is changed to offer. Weight pool, wait list, and wait list specifically. This section is modified for clarification on when a wait list is utilized. We utilize the wait list after the second lottery. Clarifies that the wait list is randomized, and also clarifies that if offered a seat in any of the applicant's choices, that the application will not be placed on the randomized wait list. Student continuation and exit criteria, general rule. Current language states, as a general rule, once a student is admitted to the magnet school or magnet program, the Office of School Choice Services may allow the student to remain in that school program until the student reaches the highest grade level offered by that magnet school or magnet program. We originally recommended that this provision be removed in its entirety. Looking forward to your conversation related to this based on a question that I had from a member yesterday, that this language may in fact be advised to stay and slightly modified. Student continuation and exit criteria, acceptance. The requirement to forward the probationary form at the school level to the Office of School Choice Services is removed. Probationary documents are kept at the school level. And student continuation acceptance. Current language that saves a transfer seat during COVID is recommended to be removed. It no longer applies. And student continuation exit, the voluntary exit. The requirement for send and receiving schools to approve the return of a student to the zone school once the student voluntarily exits the magnet school or magnet program is removed. The proposed revision reads, students who wish to voluntarily exit a magnet school or magnet program after the school year is in progress may complete a request to withdraw from the magnet school or magnet program. Once exited from the magnet program or school, the student shall return to his or her zone school.
Students entering OCPS from another county, state, or country. This section is modified to clarify that the student's most recent magnet enrollment outside of Orange County must have included either a magnet school or magnet program. This section also clarifies that the request is for consideration, but not a guaranteed placement. On the second section, students entering OCPS from another county, state, or country, proof of enrollment. This section is modified to clarify that students can apply for the OCPS magnet school or magnet program, even if they are still currently enrolled in their non-OCPS school. The proposed revision reads, must submit proof that they are or were enrolled in a magnet school or magnet program during the previous and/or current school year. Must provide transcripts showing courses taken and current or most recent enrollment. The top of this slide, students entering OCPS from another county, state, or country for visual and performing arts has been added. Language is added pertaining to visual or performing arts magnets. The proposed revision states, students applying for a visual or performing arts program or school must meet eligibility requirements and meet audition requirements in order to be considered for placement. That center process for the creation of new schools, program replication of a magnet theme at a new site or moving of a magnet program from one school to another. The middle section there on slide 29. Thank you. Proposed new title for this is Process for the Creation or Replication of a Magnet School or Magnet Program. That bottom section, Process for the Creation of New Schools, Program Replication of a Magnet Theme at a New Site, or Movement of a Magnet Program from one site to another. The Principal Supervisor is added in lieu of Area Superintendent. The proposed revision reads, after approval by the Principal Supervisor and at any time throughout the year, a principal may submit a proposal to the Office of School Choice Services and apply for internal academy status for zoned students only. Process for reverting, redeveloping, or withdrawing an existing magnet school or magnet program. When a magnet program may be discontinued, the term effectively is changed to successfully. The proposed revision reads, the magnet school or magnet program is not able to be successfully implemented. The process in the bottom section for reverting, redeveloping, or withdrawing an existing magnet school or magnet program. On principal request, this section is modified to require the approval of the principal, supervisor, and superintendent or designee before the principal of a magnet school or magnet program can submit a request to revert, redevelop, or withdraw the magnet school or magnet program. The proposed revision will read, the principal of a magnet school or magnet program may submit to the Office of School Choice Services a request to revert, redevelop, or withdraw the magnet school or the magnet program located at a particular school site with the approval of the principal, supervisor, and superintendent or designee.
Budget and funding implications. The term program is changed to magnet to to incorporate both magnet schools and magnet programs. In addition, clarification is added to the timeline for when the magnet is expected to fully be implemented, and the requirement for the superintendent to direct the Office of School Choice Services to monitor the process is removed. Monitor and evaluation, who monitors? This section is modified to allow the Office of School Choice to conduct a review of the magnet schools and magnet programs. Monitor and evaluation, data to review. Current language states data on selection committees at the high school performing arts schools used to select students for magnet schools or magnet programs, including the diversity of these committees. It is recommended that this section be removed. And monitor and evaluation, submission of data. The last section, language is removed to make this section more concise. The proposed revision reads, the review will be submitted to the superintendent or designee each school year. Superintendent?
All right, thank you, Dr. Jenkins. Seeing nobody else wishing to opine at this time, let me start with, I have several to mays to shalls that I just have questions about. The first one is on for academic and related eligibility criteria, Roman numeral 4, prior to the first day of school each year, a principal may submit any such new requirement to the office. So is it definitely a may, that they may submit it, or are they required to submit? Okay. Under application, selection, and admission process 5, this may be happy to glad, but under C, where we use the term with the exemption of the following, I think the term we're looking for there is exception. Huh? Later in my red line, it says exception, but under line C, it says exemption. Yours says exception?
It's correct.
Oh, okay, good. That's.
Yeah.
Are you looking at the document that was sent to us from Amy? In BoardDocs, okay. I was looking at the one sent by Amy, so.
Yeah, we had some last minute changes last night.
Okay. Oh, okay. Well, maybe some of these will be.
We caught some of those, yes.
Okay. Sorry, I have to back up each time to figure out where I am. Can I tell you that I am on page 4?
Mm-hmm.
And we're referring to, it's letter F. On grade level, applicants are computer selected. Had a question about computer selected. I think when we say computer selected, we're talking about random. I'm assuming. Would that be right? Because sometimes we use the term random, sometimes we use computer random, and sometimes we use computer selected. So I would ask that if we could to make them consistent, whatever term we want to use. This one, I just don't understand how this works, and this is just a matter of me not understanding the lottery process, but I'm on H. Additional applicants, open seats, and lottery information. If there are additional eligible applicants and open seats are available in a magnet school program after the first lottery, a second lottery will be conducted. So I was confused about that because it would seem to me that there wouldn't be any left over after the first lottery, but that tells me I just don't understand how this works. So, Mr. Moody, can you walk me through how there would be seats left over after we just went through a lottery?
Go ahead.
So we could actually, in the first lottery, if we say we had 100 seats in a program in 9th grade, we could actually fill them all because we had maybe 125 applicants. So we offer out all 100 seats during the first lottery. But let's say 25 of those families say, I don't think so, too far change my mind, whatever. So we are able to ask the schools how many people did not register. They would tell us 25. We would take that 25 and put it into the second lottery for any remaining applicants who might have chosen that particular program.
Okay, thank you. And in that same paragraph, we have changed the word where it says frequently asked questions and other relevant information will be posted on the Office of School Choice Services website, now says may be posted. And so we went from we're going to we might to have.
Changed to shall.
It should be shall.
Here it says shall.
Madam Chair.
Okay, sorry.
Correct.
I got this on Friday. I Okay, I'm going to be honest with you though, Amy. Getting it Friday, Easter weekend, this much reading. I had 2 hours, a 2-hour assignment I had given myself on Monday that I ditched, and I didn't get through all of these. And then to know that I would need to go to BoardDocs and know that they might have changed, I really think, I think the board should have 7 full days. Okay, yeah. Yeah, okay, thank you. I think that will be. I hated to even say anything because you're the one who has to put all this together. And I know you have a ton on your plate, so I hated to even say anything, but this is not our most efficient work at the table either. And to anybody who is reading this for the first time, I don't think we can read it with the most critical eye. Let me keep going, and then I'm going to go to Member Byrd in just a minute. Oh, this was the one Mr. Moody mentioned. So not knowing enough about magnet programs, I assumed that once you got in, you got to stay in as long as you were, at that in that school's grade level. But I never saw it written anywhere, and I didn't read the strike-through stuff. So on number 8, student continuation and exit criteria, A was deleted. And so I didn't read the deleted. So I called Mr. Moody to find out. Once you're in, say everything's going fine, you're keeping up your grade point, you're in good standing, do you stay in or do you have to apply every year? So with the absence of this language being there, somebody who doesn't know and just reads the policy wouldn't know that. So I'd like to see us put this language back in. Mr. Moody pointed out that one of the issues was this language didn't have any qualifiers like you do have to remain in good standing. So I think we could easily amend this to say as once a student is admitted to a magnet program or the school and remains in good standing, the Office of School Choice may allow the student to remain. Something simple like that just makes it clear somewhere in this policy that as long as you're doing well, you stay. And that's actually all I have. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. My first question is around the replication of new magnets, or the replication of magnets. I just need a little clarification on if there is a different procedure if we are replicating an existing magnet in another school, as opposed to creating a new magnet, as far as the requirement that there is a year as an academy status first. And maybe this is just my fault. Maybe I didn't read that clear enough. But I was just wondering if I can get a little clarification on the procedures or if there's any difference in the procedures for replication as opposed to creation of a new magnet.
Perfect, thank you. You recognized?
Yes, ma'am. A replication of a program would go through the same process as a new program. We would recognize that as a new program to that particular school site.
Did that answer your question, Vice Chair?
Yes, thank you. And then my second question is just about the monitoring and evaluation. I see that it says this report may include but is not limited to the following, and then you have several examples. Most of those examples are based on data as far as students that have been admitted, students that are how the students are performing, the backgrounds of the students, things like that. But I'm wondering if we could also do things, take more informal, get more informal data, such as surveys of parents and students that are in the magnets. And the reason I say this is because I have heard sometimes from various magnet programs around the district, maybe they're not doing as well as they did at one time, or maybe they, have lost a main teacher that was the driving force behind the magnet. So there's not as much content, magnet content being taught, and those kinds of things. So I'm just wondering if there's any way for us to monitor that kind of input from parents and students that are a part of the magnet, as far as maybe what their experience has been like while they were a part of the magnet. I think that would be really valuable information to have.
So part of our review when we work individually with each program is not just to look at the hard data of, say, student achievement or demographics. One of the as important aspects of a highly functioning magnet program is what they're doing for their children, their community, their parents, and their school. So we also collect, encourage, coach, work with, model, including surveys, including recruitment plans, including activities for showcasing, as well as for having capstones at the end of the program, so that you could say, as a student in a STEM program in a middle school in 8th grade, this is what I've used to learn, and this is my project and my learning. So we try to cover the gambit following the pillars outlined at the beginning of this particular policy. At the very beginning, 1A through E. We use those pillars that are also modeled inside of Magnet Schools of America, a guiding force for us, so that our review is comprehensive. So I wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying.
Okay, so what I heard you say was that you encourage the collection of that data, but I'm just wondering, does that mean that we are actually getting it? Do we have actual input and survey results from current students and current parents as to how they feel their experience in the magnet program is, as maybe as compared to what they were told they would get out of the magnet program, or what was showcased as the magnet before they started attending?
Yes, ma'am. So I use the word encourage so that I would show basically that the magnet team helps, if you will, and assists programs in terms of helping them if they're stuck, or if they need modeling or examples, and certainly if they need a cheerleader. When we do the magnet reviews, we do a collection of documentations, either in hard copies or electronically as the choice of the school program. And we collect all the artifacts and review those artifacts to determine what the rating would be for that particular program. And then we work with programs as we do that to increase their outreach to the community for their activities for their children, or whatever might be something that could be a need for improvement.
Okay, and
I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
and my
Madam
Go
Chair.
ahead.
Dr. Jenkins.
So Member Byrd, keep in mind there are probably pretty extensive surveys that those parents in the magnet program would be included in for the school as a whole. I think what you're asking is, can there be mandated or put in place specific survey items or specific separate survey for parents and students who are in the magnet program? We can certainly look at that.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. And then my final question is just these particular evaluations. It says that reports are given to the school board, are submitted to the superintendent each year, and that they're presented to the school board. I'm just wanting to, and please forgive me if we have gotten these reports and I just don't remember, because, we have a lot on our board docs sometimes. But I'm just wondering when those are usually presented to the school board, where would we see those? Or when, what time of year?
So our review cycle is a little unusual, mostly because of when the activities are, how long it takes to go through each of the programs, reviews, and what else is happening, like the lottery at the same time. So our programs are reviewed for second semester of one school year and first semester of another. That brings us a full cycle, and in December, January, they deliver to us whatever artifacts they have to support the activities and outreach that they have done for the students during that time period. And then we go through those. We have a form that we had worked with research and development on, and we go through that particular instrument and see where that particular program falls. Every program has their own form that is used for the review, and we use basically spreadsheets to be comprehensive and see where programs have moved from one year to another. We have not presented a full presentation to the board recently. It's certainly something we could do.
Okay, no, that's good. That answers my question. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't, so it makes me feel better. Make sure it wasn't something I just missed. Thank you.
No, ma'am.
Anything else, Vice Chair?
No, that's it. Thank you.
All righty, perfect. Dr. Jenkins, then, I think we're ready for the next policy. It should be under firearms.
Can I proceed?
Oh, I'm
Proceed?
sorry. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Wasn't sure. Okay, so I'm going to be presenting a new policy, JICI, Firearms and Weapons. This policy is being created, to specifically and explicitly prohibit firearms and weapons on school board property. Although there is a reference in other policies such as JIC and JLIE, it is important to have a separate policy due to the heightened concern for safety when dealing with firearms and weapons. Action summary policy language is created to include content, formatting, and terminology edits consistent with statutory language. The first definition in JICI is going to be for board property, and I aligned this with policy ADC, which was recently adopted. So board property means all property that is owned, leased, contracted for, or controlled by the School Board of Orange County, Florida. Board property includes but is not limited to all schools, district offices, shops, and related closed areas, playgrounds, practice fields, football fields, baseball fields, softball fields, soccer fields, tennis courts, pool areas, any other school recreational facilities, all open areas, and board-owned vehicles. The definition for firearm comes from section 790.001 Florida statutes and will read, firearm means any weapon which will, is designed to, or may readily be converted to expel a projectile by the action of an explosive. The frame or receiver of any such weapon, any firearm muffler or firearm silencer, any destructive device, or any machine gun. There's also a definition for school-sponsored event, and that also matches board policy ADC. And school-sponsored event will mean any event sponsored by the board and/or Orange County Public Schools that occurs on or off board property. School-sponsored events include, but are not limited to, I apologize, I need to fix that, sporting events, field trips, dances, and theatrical productions. Weapon. This definition comes from Section 790.001 Florida statutes. And a weapon means any dirk, such as a dagger, knife, metallic knuckles, slugshot, billy, tear gas gun, chemical weapon or device, or other deadly weapon. Also included are objects that are used to intimidate or threaten another person, or objects used to harm another person. Prohibition of firearms and weapons. I'm recommending the language to read, the board recognizes the importance of safety for all OCPS students, board employees, contracted vendors, visitors, and other members of the public. Therefore, the board prohibits any OCPS student, board employee, member of the public, contracted vendor, and visitors, except law enforcement officers as defined in Chapter 943 Florida statutes, from bringing or using a firearm or weapon on board property, school transportation, and any school-sponsored activity, regardless if he or she has a permit to carry a firearm as allowed under Section 790.06 Florida statutes. This prohibition includes but is not limited to possessing or carrying a firearm or weapon on his or her person, in a vehicle, and/or any other container or conveyance. The prohibition for students. Students found in violation of this policy while on board property, school transportation, or at any school-sponsored event may subject the student to disciplinary action in accordance with the Code of Student Conduct. In addition, the violation shall be reported to law enforcement, which could result in criminal prosecution. The prohibition for employees. Board employees found in violation of this policy while on board property, school transportation, or any school-sponsored event may subject the employee to disciplinary action. In addition, the violation shall be reported to law enforcement, which could result in criminal prosecution. And the prohibition for members of the public. Contracted vendors, visitors, and other members of the public found in violation of this policy shall be reported to law enforcement and subsequently referred to the principal or designee or building administrator for further action. Further action may include, but is not limited to, trespassing the individual from board property. In addition, the violation may result in criminal prosecution. Dr. Jenkins.
Okay. Nobody's recognized. I have one thing that I think is incorrect, but it sounds like it's in the statute. So it's under 1B, the portion that says any destructive device. It would seem to me that a pair of scissors could be a destructive device. So I was going to suggest that we change that to say any similar destructive device or any other device capable of similar destruction, since scissors are destructive devices. But if you're telling me it's in statute, we're probably stuck with that language. Is that the case, or can we modify it?
We can actually modify it. I just borrowed the definition from statute, so that way it was concise with Florida law, but we're not required to use that definition.
So I prefer any other destructive device capable of similar, any other device capable of similar destruction, just because that any destructive device is just so ridiculously broad. I just thought of scissors, but I'm sure I can think of a million things that are destructive devices, and we're clearly talking about firearms. And we have a separate, go ahead, John, we have a separate part for weapons. So, John, go ahead.
Madam Chair, there's a definition of destructive device in that statute, which it says it means any bomb, grenade, mine, rocket, missile, pipe bomb, or similar device containing an explosive, incendiary, or poison gas, including any frangible, I don't even know what that word means, container filled with an explosive, incendiary, explosive gas, or expanding gas.
I feel so much better about the legislature. But So what I think, John, if we're going to use their term of destructive device, I would like us to have destructive device as a definition in this section. And then that cures the problem. I mean, we're putting the firearm definition, the weapon definition. John, do you have see any reason why we don't define destructive device
No,
as it's defined?
I think it just makes it more complete if we do it.
Yeah, and then keeping consistent with the language they're using is good, now that the language is defined. Okay.
Okay, and then if I may, under the prohibition, we do prohibit firearms and weapons. Would you also like me to add in prohibition of firearms, destructive devices, and weapons? So that way it's all inclusive?
Well, firearms, destructive device is already defined under firearm.
Okay.
So if you say firearm, you've got it all. I guess you could be redundant.
I'm almost thinking it might be a good idea because
Yeah.
to me, I don't know that I would, in my own opinion or my own mind, I don't know that I would put bomb in with firearm.
My brain would not go that way, no.
So I think it's better if we
Yeah.
just lay it out completely.
Yeah. And so then the other, and this may have gotten fixed, I suspect this got fixed, because it is under 2, prohibition of firearms, under A, Roman numeral 1, and it's a sentence structure problem with the first sentence. Students found in violation of this policy while on board property, school transportation, or any other school-sponsored event may subject the student to disciplinary action. Did that get fixed? Okay, so it says that the student found that might subject the student. So we need to revise this language. And there's 2, may be subjected, I think is the way it should read, may be subjected to disciplinary action. And the same applies to, I think, Roman numeral 2, board employees found in violation, at any school may be the employee should be may be subjected to disciplinary action. Member Gallo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just for clarification, how do we communicate this to parents? Because a lot of parents do have concealed weapons permits, and they do carry their gun in their car. Half the time, they forget about carrying their gun in the car. If they were to be on campus and realize it or something would happen, like how would we address that? Does safe harbor apply to our parents? Because I know many times I've been on my way here, and I've had to turn around because I had to take the gun out of my car. And so what would happen? Like what is our policy, and how do we let parents know? Because I know a lot of parents probably don't know that they can't be in a parking lot, even if you have your concealed weapons, with a gun in your car.
Okay, got an answer for that, anybody? Great question. Dr. Jenkins?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So it's an excellent question. I think we may need to consider signage at the outer gate on our when entering our property that speaks to the prohibition. And I think we'll have to have both a social media campaign and a generic campaign saying this is what the new policy actually states. That's an excellent point. I think signage is critical, and I think we need to have a campaign to say this is now the rule on any OCPS property or on our vehicles.
Okay, thank
Good
you.
point.
And the safe harbor question, if we could get an answer on that. So I'm a parent. I've entered school property to drop a student off, and I'm waiting in line, or to pick a student up, I'm waiting in line. I've just seen the sign, it's processed, but I'm already in line. Is there anything the parent can do in that situation? I don't know how easy it is to get out of line, but you're technically on school property. So I kind of liked your safe harbor, because the idea of saying, raise your hand, hey, I have a problem here and I didn't mean to do this. Thoughts?
I'm looking at Chief Holmes.
It does give some discretion to law enforcement. It can be reported to law enforcement, and at that point, they would have to make some sort of decision. If it were to be the board's desire to do that, there could be some reference in here regarding that. It does get dicey.
Yeah.
okay?
Mhm.
We like things really cut and dry when we make these kind of decisions, and so my preference would be it's an
Zero
easy
tolerance.
decision for, they can exercise discretion in certain circumstances. However, somebody walks in here, we got a board meeting, they're carrying, and they're in our building, and they're armed. They're coming with us.
Well, hang on a second. Okay, so we're different than county government. I just thought about this. County government, you can walk into the county building, you just can't go into the chambers, and you can carry a gun if
Yeah,
you have a license, a permit.
Yes, ma'am. In this particular situation, we're saying not on board property, period. You're not bringing it on board property.
Oh, I know that's what the policy is saying. I'm just saying, are we certain that we are legally allowed to do that if this isn't a school building?
Yes.
Oh, I hope so. Whoa, John.
790.11.5A1.
Could you read it?
I can, as soon as my computer boots up. I might have a, I can't read on my phone, it's too little.
Hey, John, you have competition.
I had it.
What'd you say?
I had it.
I had it.
While they're looking, I'm still pondering Member Gallo's thought and your thoughts too as well, Chair. So I'm in line to pick up my child. I'm like fifth car in line, and I think, oh my gosh, I've got a permit, but I shouldn't have come and gotten in line. So if I was going to try to attempt a safe harbor, do I blow my horn, I wave my arms and say, could you send the SRO over? I need to tell him something along those lines as a means of safe harbor? Or do I just risk it to think, I'm fifth in line, I'm just going to pick up my kid and go and hope nobody stopped me for any reason? Or do I get out of line and lose my space and come back and be 200th in line because I went back home to put my gun up? That's a conscious decision, and I would prefer that there's some ability for an honest mistake to flag yourself and indicate that. I just don't know if we can do it consistently. I worry about somebody go get the SRO, there's a problem. Jenkins is raising her hands and making a fuss over there, something's wrong, and she's asking for the SRO. I don't know how we manage it without creating an even greater commotion for the other people that are in the car line. I'm intrigued by the scenario. I just don't have a great solution. I figured I'd just give you my angst out loud because I can't think of the best solution. Do you flag down the SRO, or do you just risk that you won't get caught, or that you'll be able to explain it somehow if you do happen to get caught for some reason? I don't know that there's an easy answer to that.
And if I can follow up on that, I'm struggling with the same thing, and I understand what you're saying, Chief, because in some regard, if we create a way of having this safe harbor, we're also signaling that this is not such a hard and fast policy. And in a perfect world, we just do such a good job of communicating that you're not going to have somebody pulling up and getting in line and having that problem. So I don't know.
And I think the challenges really are in our more rural districts. Like I'm thinking East River, I'm thinking of Popka High, where I'll use my dad, for example. He's never in his car without a gun in it. So if I called him and say, hey, Dad, I need you to pick up my kids, I can't make it, and he would think nothing of it. He wouldn't think to even call somebody over because he'd have no clue that he was in violation. He has a concealed weapons permit. And if something happened, he got searched, then he'd get in trouble for something he didn't know. So those are the scenarios like I worry about. We absolutely can't have guns on campus. I've been fighting for sensible gun laws for the last 7 years. But then I don't want to get caught up where we're arresting people just because they weren't aware or they didn't know and they were innocently doing anything. So I don't have a solution either. It's kind of a catch-22. Maybe we handle it on a case-by-case scenario, because I promise you there are people going in car lines right now that have a gun in their car and they don't know they're not supposed to.
But I will say that the language that's in here does not say they'll be arrested. It says it'll be reported to law enforcement if it's discovered, and which could result in criminal prosecution. So there is the opportunity for law enforcement to hear this person out and say, okay, you have a concealed permit, you keep this car in your car, you keep it in your car all the time. Your daughter just called emergency, go pick up the kids, you weren't aware. I kind of doubt much is going to come of that. So I think we may be right where we want to be.
Yeah.
We haven't condoned it in any way.
I think messaging, as Dr. Jenkins mentioned, will be
Totally.
key. I mean, as long as we've done due diligence and we've communicated to the best of our ability, then we'll just have to handle it case by case, because we don't want to encourage people to.
Ms. Enville, are you going to read us the language?
I was going to say on that note, just for a second, so a police officer can certainly exercise discretion, like if you're stopped for speeding, they may just give you a warning. In most instances, they're going to give you the ticket. But there is some discretion on the part of the officer. It's understood.
Mm-hmm.
This is a long section. It's 790.0115. And are we asking about in the vehicle? Is that where we wanted to read that particular section?
Actually, what I was asking about is in the administration building, not in the classroom. Can a person with a concealed weapon bring that weapon into this building?
That's a
So-
different statute.
Go ahead.
790.06, subsection 12A. A license under this section does not authorize any person to openly carry a handgun or carry a concealed weapon or firearm into 9. Any school, college, or professional athletic event not related to firearms. 10. Any elementary or secondary school facility or administrative building. You cannot carry a concealed weapon into any school property at all.
That is part of their training. If you go for concealed carry, that's part of that curriculum. They should know that. And I'm not saying people don't make mistakes, forget about it. It's habits in my, waistband or person. I normally carry concealed and have a permit. But that said, you're responsible for managing your firearm at all times.
Forget about that piece. It is in the training. They do tell you where you can and can't, and they tell you what states are reciprocal and all that. So that's true. They should be aware.
But the distinction that somebody who's going into the county administration building all the time has their concealed carry permit, can walk around county government right over there, you could see how somebody would be confused about why they can't walk into this building. I'm frankly confused. I'm relieved because I just found a perk to being on the school board. I didn't have it from being county commission, so there you go. Not that there aren't many others. That's just one I wasn't aware of. All right. We done, Ms. Gallo? All right, we're done. That's all we got on this. Next policy. Yeah.
I'm going to have you sit here with me.
Here we go.
Okay.
Next policy.
So we are now going to present JICK threats. I'm going to keep Chief Holmes right here next to me in case there's any questions for him. And I believe I also have Mary Bridges here too. So I got mental health and I got district police. So the purpose of the revisions, JICK is being revised to include legislative updates and updates required by the State Board of Education through the Florida Administrative Code. Revisions have been made to the existing policy language to include legislative updates, content, formatting, and terminology edits consistent with statutory language and the model policy. A lot of the revisions you are going to see do come from Senate Bill 590, which was adopted last year, that modified several different statutes, so I will try to point out which statute was modified under that bill. And then they also come from the new Florida Administrative Code Rule 6A-1.0018, which is the school safety rule. And so we tried to implement all of those changes into JICK. So beginning with the policy itself, I'm recommending that we kind of change it a little bit where we break everything up into different sections. So right now, everything's included under threat assessment teams, but I'd like to do different sections. So one for purpose and definitions, one for threat assessment teams in general as it applies to threats of harm to others and threats of self-harm, one section for threats of harm to others, and then one section for threats of self-harm. And that way it's easier to find when parents are looking for specific information on what type of threat. Going into the definition section, I'm going to go over a lot of definitions here, but I'll go over them further when we go into the policy as to where they apply. So starting with the behavioral threat assessment, under the Florida Administrative Code rule, they've changed the term behavioral threat assessment to the Comprehensive School Threat Assessment Guidelines, or CSTAG as we call it. Behavioral threat assessment is in statute, but the rule further defines it as CSTAG, so we're recommending to change that throughout the policy. So you'll see red lines throughout the policy changing behavioral threat assessment to CSTAG. Also, the Florida Administrative Code uses the term district, and so in order to align portions of the policy with the code, I'm recommending adding the definition as district also means Orange County Public Schools. The definition for guardian. So this matches KBBA, one of our current policies, and then we also added in language pertaining to IDEA. So guardian or legal guardian, means the agency or individual that has been granted legal custody of a minor or has been granted educational guardianship by OCPS Office of Student Enrollment. If the child is eligible for services under the Individuals with Disabilities Act, then a guardian or legal guardian may also mean an individual acting in the place of a biological or adoptive parent, including a grandparent, step-parent, or other relative with whom the child lives, or an individual who is legally responsible for the child's welfare. Under involuntary examination, we do already have that definition. However, we're recommending adding in a mobile crisis unit as another person or agency that can do a type of involuntary examination or an assessment on our property to determine whether a student needs to be transported. Under the definition of law enforcement officer, we do currently have that. One other note to make here is throughout the policy, we use law enforcement officer / school resource officer. However, here I'm recommending law enforcement officer for the definition includes the term school resource officer, and then you'll see throughout the policy in the red line that SRO or school resource officer will be deleted, and just law enforcement officer will be there because it includes both types of officers. Also under that definition, we're recommending to remove the portion that says law enforcement officers are the only designated official on board property to conduct an assessment to determine if an involuntary examination is required. Again, we also have mobile crisis units that do that as well. And then this is going to be removed and addressed under threats of self-harm. So I'll go into more detail on that as we get to that section. Let's see. I'm also recommending adding the term parent, and this definition matches what's in KBBA, which comes directly from statute. Parent means a woman who gives birth to a child or a man whose consent to the adoption of the child would be required under Section 63.062 Florida statutes. If a child has been legally adopted, the term parent means the adoptive mother or father of the child. The term does not include an individual whose parental relationship to the child has been legally terminated or an alleged or prospective parent. The reasonable attempt to notify. So this comes from Senate Bill 590, and it requires us to do a reasonable attempt to notify parents. And so I thought it was important to include the definition here because it will be used in the threats of self-harm section. So a reasonable attempt to notify means the exercise of reasonable diligence and care by the principal or designee to make contact with the student's parent or legal guardian or other known emergency contact whom the student's parent or legal guardian has authorized to receive notification of an involuntary examination. A reasonable attempt to notify includes, at minimum, the principal or designee using available methods of communication to contact the student's parent or legal guardian or other known emergency contact, including, but not limited to, telephone calls, text messages, emails, and voicemail messages following the decision to initiate an involuntary examination of the student. There are exceptions to this, which we'll address in the threats of self-harm section. Receiving facility. Again, this is going to be used in the self-harm section, so I recommend adding it here, but it has the same meaning as defined in Section 394.455 Florida statutes. The school-based mental health services provider, this comes from that new Florida Administrative Code rule. And it means a school psychologist certified under Rule 6A-4.0311 Florida Administrative Code, a school social worker certified under Rule 6A-4.035 Florida Administrative Code, a school counselor certified under Rule 6A-4.0181 Florida Administrative Code, or a mental health professional licensed under Chapter 490 or 491 Florida statutes who is employed or contracted by a district to provide mental health services in school. Under the substantive threats section, substantive threats is broken down into serious and very serious threats. Very serious currently reads, very serious substantive threats are threats to kill, rape, or cause serious injury with a weapon. As their district threat assessment team, we sat and discussed this actually for a little bit of time and talked about how somebody could make a very serious substantive threat and cause serious injury without a weapon. And so we thought it was important to remove that particular statement because we didn't want to limit ourselves to serious injury with a weapon. So under the section threat assessment teams, the Florida Administrative Code gave us a further definition for the counseling team member. And it states that the counseling team member must be a school-based mental health services provider that is able to access student mental health records. They also gave us a clear definition for law enforcement under a threat assessment team. And the law enforcement team member must be a sworn law enforcement officer. At minimum, a law enforcement officer serving on a threat assessment team must have access to local records management system information, the Criminal Justice Information System, and the Florida Crime Information Center and National Crime Information Center databases. Officers serving on a school-based threat assessment team serving on school-based threat assessment teams must also have clearance to review criminal justice information and criminal history record information. If there is not a sworn law enforcement officer available, the school shall contact OCPS district police. So this last portion was already in policy, but we're moving it up here under the definition for law enforcement. And that's just when a threat assessment team at a school, perhaps their SRO had to step off campus or somebody's not available, maybe it's after hours and they're having to convene an emergency threat assessment team meeting, they can then contact our district police and get either someone to participate or our district police can get someone there from the local agency. Okay. And again, that's that section where if there's not a law enforcement officer available, then we'll contact district police. That was moved up under the law enforcement definition. So under procedures for threat assessment team meetings, under the Florida Administrative Code rule, we are required to document each monthly meeting and include the meeting date, time, team members in attendance, and cases discussed, and actions taken. This is something that we already currently do, and schools are currently filling this out. We're just codifying it to policy as required by the rule. But this is something that's already done at each monthly threat assessment team meeting. This next section, Chair, you may remember this section fondly because we talked about it a lot previously. And now that we've implemented this and we've gone through this threat assessment process more as a district threat assessment team, I think we have come up with some great language that pertains to non-OCPS schools, because this language here, upon the transfer of a student to a different school, the threat assessment team shall verify that any intervention services provided to the student remain in place until the threat assessments team at the receiving school independently determines the need for intervention services. So this is something within OCPS we can definitely do. If a student's going from one school to another school, we can definitely ensure that those intervention services are available. The concern came previously that we wouldn't be able to do that if they go out of county or to a non-OCPS school because we can't require that school to do it. So we are recommending adding a disclaimer here that states, as it pertains to non-OCPS schools, the stat from the OCPS school shall notify the non-OCPS school of any interventions currently in place for the student as detailed in the threat assessment upon request of records from the non-OCPS school. Okay. And then under the same section, procedures for threat assessment teams, this relates to section 1003.25, where we're required to provide, when a student transfers to a new school, whether it's within Orange County Public Schools or outside of Orange County Public Schools, we are required to provide those threat assessments within 3 school days. However, we are adding in there, because it is current practice and something that we've spoken to the DOE about, that it's upon the request of the receiving school. So obviously, if a student goes to a new school, we haven't received that records request yet, we're not going to know where to send that to within those 3 days. So we're going to wait for that request, and then we will send those records. This next section, under the threat assessment teams in general, procedures for threat assessments, referrals to mental health. This is required by the Florida Administrative Code, that rule I discussed earlier. Referrals may be made to mental health services for an OCPS student by members of the STAT or school administration based on the needs of the student. Referrals shall be made in accordance with the OCPS Threat Procedures Guide. And so we currently have a process in place for our students who pose a very serious substantive threat, where they are referred to our mental health designee at the school who works with our district mental health staff. And then we also have systems in place for students who make threats of self-harm, and that's all contained within our Threat Procedures Guide. Excuse me. And then, I apologize, I think I went forward too fast. And then this next modification that we're recommending also may be required by House Bill 1421, which we're anticipating the governor will probably sign, but it does require at least one member from each required member group of the threat assessment team to be involved in the threat assessment process and final decision making. And that is something that we already currently train on, and we already tell our threat assessment team members that everybody has to be there. So it's not something that's going to change our procedure, but it is something that needs to be codified into policy. Okay, into the threats to others section. We're talking about school-based threat assessment teams and reporting their data. So initially, we copied this language verbatim from statute on how the school-based threat assessment teams were to report the quantitative data to the department or the DOE. The actual procedure, which is more clarified in the Florida Administrative Code rule, I apologize, is that the school-based teams actually report their data to the district itself, and then we collect all of that and send it to the DOE. The new data that we also have to collect we already report the total number of threat assessments, but we also now have to include the number of transient threats, the number of substantive threats, and the gender, race, and grade level of all students assessed by each school-based threat assessment team. So that's something that we are now required to do by this new rule. Under the database for threats to others, as we all know, there is a Florida school safety portal that was supposed to be a repository for information where we were to upload our threat assessments to for all counties in the state of Florida to access. However, we can't currently upload documents there. It is more of a launch pad, and I think I've explained this before, and it's still currently in that state, where you go in and you click on something and it'll take you to an actual site. So if I'm law enforcement and I want to go to the criminal justice site, if I log into the portal, there'll just be a link there that'll take me to the criminal justice site. So it's just like an extra step as opposed to going directly there. So the statute itself allows for the language upon availability of the database, and we're just recommending to add that back in because the database isn't fully available yet. And so we just want to make sure that we're not held violating our own policy for not using the portal all the time because it's not something that's actually usable quite yet. For the notification and consultation, We had those combined into one subsection previously, and we're recommending separating those into two subsections. So one would be consultation with law enforcement, and the next would be notification to the parent or guardian. For notification to the parent or legal guardian, we are recommending adding language here that's in compliance with the Florida Administrative Code and Senate Bill 590, which modifies 1006-07. And the new addition would read, notwithstanding any other provision of law, the principal or designee shall timely notify parents or legal guardians of threats and unlawful acts or significant emergencies as defined in Section 1006-07 Florida statutes, which occur on school grounds, during school transportation, or during school-sponsored activities. The notification shall follow the requirements set forth in the OCPS Threat Procedures Guide as to timing, content, scope, manner of notification, consultation with law enforcement, and involvement of the school threat assessment team. For the notification of substantive threats, we currently have in our policy that OCPS shall contact the parent or guardian of the intended target of a substantive threat. However, we are required to contact the parent of any type of threat. So even if it's a transient threat, it may just change as it relates to timing and content of what you tell the parent, but we are required to notify them of all types of threats. So threats to others for the threat assessment, I apologize. Nope, going back. Threats to others for notification to the parent or guardian, and this is in compliance with the Florida Administrative Code. All notifications must be in compliance with the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, which is FERPA, and that's something that we already do and we already have in our Threat Procedures Guide. Let's see. Sorry. Okay, moving on to the threats of self-harm section. And then this is the exemption portion that I was talking about earlier. This comes from Senate Bill 590, which modifies 1002.20 Florida statutes. Basically, if a principal is required to notify a parent legal guardian of a student who makes a threat of self-harm, unless there's a reasonable belief that such delay is necessary to avoid jeopardizing the health and safety of the student. So if there needs to be a delay, a principal or designee may do that. In addition, the principal or designee is required to document the method and number of reasonable attempts to notify the student's parent or legal guardian or other known emergency contact and the outcome of each attempt. And that comes from Senate Bill 590, which also modifies 1002.20. It goes on to read that a principal or designee who successfully notifies an emergency contact other than the parent or legal guardian may only share the information necessary to alert the contact that the parent or legal guardian must be contacted. Any contact with an emergency contact who is not the parent or legal guardian must comply with federal and state law, which includes FERPA and Chapter 1002 of Florida statutes. The next subsection, initially we had it listed as law enforcement and or school resource officer involvement. We're recommending separating that into three subsections, and the first one being law enforcement training, the next being evaluation, and the third being transporting to a receiving facility. So as previously stated, I went through and I took out anywhere it referenced school resource officer because that is included in the definition for law enforcement officers. So here you'll see the change where it says law enforcement officers are required by Section 1006.12 Florida statutes to complete the mental health crisis intervention training using a curriculum developed by the National Organization with expertise in mental health intervention. However, this doesn't apply to all law enforcement officers, only to those that are going to be SROs. So specifically here, I did reference that if the law enforcement officer is also a school resource officer. So that's the only place where I separated it out for clarification. Under the evaluation section, we're recommending adding language in compliance with Senate Bill 590, which modifies 1011.62 Florida statutes. And it would read that school or law enforcement personnel must make a reasonable attempt to contact a mental health professional who may initiate an involuntary examination pursuant to Section 394.463 Florida statutes, unless the child poses an imminent danger to themselves or others before initiating an involuntary examination. Such contact may be in person or using telehealth as defined in Section 456.47 Florida statutes. The next section, again, this is our current practice. It's something I discussed earlier, that the two officials on board property that can actually do the assessment to determine whether a person should be transported to a receiving facility are going to be law enforcement officers and the mobile crisis units. So currently, those are the two officials that can do that. Transporting to a receiving facility. Currently, we have that law enforcement officers are the only officials on board property that have the authority to transport a student or employee. We're recommending modifying this language a little bit and adding in that law enforcement officers are the only officials on board property that have authority to decide to transport a student and or employee to a receiving facility for evaluation. That decide to portion in there is really because it's up to the law enforcement officer whether they want to allow the parent or guardian to transport the child themselves, or maybe they need to call an ambulance or transport by some other means, but that would be up to the law enforcement officer. And then again, the decision to allow the parent or legal guardian to transport in lieu of the law enforcement officer rests solely with the law enforcement officer. The next section is a reporting requirement we have, which was adopted under Senate Bill 590, which modified 1006-07 Florida statutes. And it requires the superintendent or designee to annually report to the Department of Children and Families the number of involuntary examinations as defined by Section 394.455 Florida statutes, which are initiated at a school, on school transportation, or at a school-sponsored activity. There's also another subsection pertaining to student identification cards, which was also adopted by Senate Bill 590, modifying 1006.386, that requires any student identification card for students in grades 6 through 12 printed during or after the 2021-2022 school year shall include the telephone numbers for national or statewide crises and suicide hotlines and text lines on the card. And that concludes our presentation.
Thank you. Member Gallo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have a couple questions. First off, I'm very excited that we're going to allow mobile crisis units to be on our campuses and to actually Baker Act students versus just a law enforcement officer. I think that's huge just for de-escalating the situation and help that child get to a better place versus just transporting them to a receiving facility, which we know really doesn't do much for a child's mental health, especially the very young children. So I do have a couple of questions on slide. I think it was page 42. Can we go back to 42? Because I just wrote the page numbers down. It says, this one kind of confused me. It says parent means, and I know this is in statute, but it says parent means a woman who gives birth to a child or a man whose consent to the adoption. So that means just a regular father that may be a biological father isn't considered a parent?
So again, this does come directly from statute. It would be like there are certain, and I can pull up the statute real quick, but there are certain fathers that are listed under 63.062 that you would require consent from. I apologize. You would require the consent in order for the child to be adopted because they are considered the legal father.
Okay. That's just it's confusing.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Jenkins, do you want to speak to that?
Just briefly, I have to tell you, we had the same conversation. However, we know what state we reside in, and statutes are pretty narrow in their description. Perhaps there can be an opportunity to see if we can state it more broadly, but we are in Florida.
All right, because that just, I mean, yay for women, but, you know, it takes two. Okay, so then the school resource officers, or the law enforcement officers, as we're calling them now, when they're a part of the threat assessment team, are they required to be, do we require them to be CIT trained, SIT trained, crisis intervention training? Are they all trained?
It's been an initiative by the sheriff's office to train all of their law enforcement officers, and they're working on that right now. But to be an SRO in a school, you have to be trained. To be a safe school officer, such as myself, a school safety officer, I'm sorry, you're required to be trained now.
Wonderful. And then, so if, and I know that we.
Let me back up on that.
Okay.
That's House Bill 1421 that's about to be signed by the governor.
Okay.
Chief, can you turn that mic a little more towards you?
Sure. That's in that last part I mentioned to you about school safety officers were required, school safety officers were required in 1421, and we're prepared.
Yeah, wonderful. And I know it gets confusing because there's like 3 definitions of guardians and school safety officers and then school resource officers. Yeah. And that encompasses all 3, right? Safe school officers.
It does.
Okay. And then my next question is, I know, and I don't think that, well, it wouldn't be an issue for traditional public schools in Orange County because we have SROs on all of our campuses, but charters have the ability to put guardians and other personnel on their campuses. So in the instance where there's some type of threat, there need to be like a quickly put together a threat assessment team. Would they then call OCPS district police to get a police officer out there so that they could be part of that threat assessment team? Or how does that work? How do we support the charters?
The charter schools have agreements with the local agencies for that service, but if they're caught in a pinch, we will provide that support for them if necessary.
Great, thank you. And then the stat, when you talked about collecting the information from the school threat assessment team and they collect all that information and it has to be reported, where is it reported to? The portal's not working, or it's only a landing page. So where does that information go? What's included in that information, and who has access to it?
You can go ahead and answer.
Okay, so are you discussing the total number of threat assessments conducted for the district, including transient substantive threats, and include the gender, race, and grade level of students? Is that the report that you're?
Well, it all kind of goes together. I was actually referring, because I had that later down, but on page 45, it talks about how the SAT, the stats have to meet at a certain amount of time, and then they have to record all that information. So I was just curious, where does that information go? But it would apply to what you referred to as well.
Okay, so I'm going to walk you through the process because that might answer your next question too. Okay. So it starts with the school. They maintain their own records for those specific interventions for those students that they discuss at their monthly meetings. However, they do then upload a meeting sheet to the learning community, which is reviewed by the EAD and or area superintendent or associate superintendent, and then that information is provided to Chief Holmes' office, who then reports purely numbers to the state as to meetings and things like that. As it pertains to the threat assessment itself, the actual document, the hard copy, is maintained at the school. We have a school threat assessment portal that we created that belongs to us, that schools then upload their threat assessment into there. The schools have access to their folder. Members of the district threat assessment team have access to all school folders. And then we pull data from there. Chief's office does that as well. They pull data from there and report just pure numbers to the state.
So they don't get like student numbers. It's just, we had this many transient threats. Okay.
Correct.
Awesome. And then 4 years really on the portal. The state's had 4 years to get the portal up and running, and we can't figure it out. Okay. So, and then my next question is, I had a couple. Let me see if I can read. On page 48, maybe that will help me remember because I can't read my own handwriting. It says, how many notify parents calls? Okay, we're going to skip that. Telehealth. That's awesome. I know that was included in the bill that we have to use telehealth. What would telehealth look like? Because I know that when social emotional learning wasn't a bad word, they put kiosk up in like Panama City after the hurricane to actually offer telehealth students mental health counseling to those students because they were extremely traumatized by the hurricane. So what would the telehealth look like? And what if a telehealth professional says this person's really in crisis and they need immediate attention? What would that look like, and how would we process that information?
Right. So for Senate Bill 590, it's stating that when the law enforcement officer or the school is reaching out to a mental health professional who can provide, who can initiate involuntary evaluation, that can be by having the mobile crisis. For us, it would be the mobile crisis unit come in person, or we can go by via telemental health. 211 can talk to the student through telehealth. So for this bill, it's through telehealth. And what we have been doing this year at all of our schools, if they needed to do that, we have used either Microsoft Teams or that type. We do have, starting next year, a couple different pilots going on where we do, the same company that put those kiosks up in the Panhandle, we call them iPads on a stick, but it's a pilot with our managing entity, or a grant from our managing entity, where we would be able to have that able to do actual counseling sessions. And also with another grant we're doing with telehealth and our nurses, and there's a mental health portion to that, and that also has that ability to be doing the actual counseling piece at the schools.
Okay, wonderful. And then my last question was on page 52. And it says that the law enforcement officer can determine if they would allow a legal guardian in lieu of the law enforcement to transfer the child to receiving facilities. Can mobile crisis units, since they're also an entity that can Baker Act, would they also be allowed to make that call? Like would they also be allowed to let a parent transport that child, or is it just strictly law enforcement? Since we're not just using SROs to Baker Act anymore, we're going to use the mobile crisis team, which I think is fabulous because they have a high rate of de-escalating the situation. Would they be allowed to let mom or dad transport?
Go ahead.
So it's my understanding, and Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, but at the end of the day, it's always the law enforcement officer that would be required to transport. So although mobile crisis may say, yes, the student is in crisis, they need to be evaluated at a receiving facility, it is up to the law enforcement officer to transport the child there.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
A couple of observations or questions. One, this is probably going to go to a definition in statute or something, but I disagree with the mental illness definition, which is under definitions. And it says that mental illness means an impairment of the mental or emotional processes that exercise conscious control of one's actions or of the ability to perceive or understand reality. It goes on to say which impairment substantially interferes with the person's ability to meet the ordinary demands of living. The word I have a problem with here is conscious, because I don't think that mental illness, I think the term conscious is exactly what it's not. I think people are not generally conscious, or they're not always conscious. So is that a definition that we have any say over? Anybody here, or is that something that's defined in statute?
So I believe, and I'm trying to find it right now, I believe this definition, I apologize, it wasn't on my red line, so you caught me off guard, but I believe this definition did come from statute, because we wouldn't draft that type of definition for mental illness. But I'm going to have to double check the model policy.
Okay.
And see if it was in there too. If it was in the model policy, then we have to copy it verbatim.
Right.
But if not, and it's just something that we included in order to be comprehensive in our policy, then it would be something that we could potentially modify, but I caution against modifying too much because it's how it would be defined in Florida
Right.
statute, and I'm going to check that for you right now.
You're checking that right now, or are you going to check and get back?
I'm going to check the statute right now just to make sure,
Okay.
see if it's
Yeah,
in there.
and I recognize that some of the things that I have pointed out are not redlined, but it's always, whenever we're going through a policy, obviously you all have taken the time to change the things you want to change, but I figure more sets of eyes, the better sets of eyes, and the better the policy turns out. So while you're checking that, under P, substantive threats, I'm not clear on or not clear. So let me explain that. It says substantive threats means threats where the intent to harm is present or not clear and require protective action. So I'm not clear about how something is present or not clear. I'm not sure why we have or not clear. It would seem like if it was not clear, then maybe it wouldn't be a substantive threat. Do you know what the or not clear is supposed to do there? Go ahead.
So this definition, I know for sure, comes from the model policy. So that is part of that. But part of the training that Dr. Dewey Cornell does, who is the person who implemented or created this program that the Florida Department of Education has adopted statewide, is one of the things he trains on us is that if you are uncertain about intent, that you should default to substantive as opposed to transient when there's uncertainty. So that's why that information is in there. That comes directly from his training and the Florida Department of Education.
Okay. So, okay. Where it's present or not clear. Okay, and then the rest, the other thing, a couple of other concerns. The wording is really strange, I think, to have in a policy language that says, the question is whether there's an express intent to physically injure someone beyond the immediate situation, or there is at least some risk that the person will carry it out. If there is doubt, the language for a policy, the question is whether, and there's 2 or 3 times where I see this. It's down there again in T. Transient threat means there's a substantial threat or intent to harm. The critical question is, it sounds like something I'd read in a book, but not language I would see in a policy. So is that coming out of the same document, perhaps?
Yes, it comes out of the model policy provided by the Florida Department of Education Office of Safe Schools.
So do we have some latitude in keeping consistent the terminology that we use in our policies? It just is very strange, the question is. There's a better way to write that, and we've never
Would you say
written.
the determining factor is?
Yeah,
That wouldn't seem to be in violation of the model policy.
right.
It's under substantive
But it's not
and transient.
typical policy language.
Yeah, and you might just restructure the whole sentence so that, yeah.
So I will,
That definitely sounds better than the question is.
I like the determining factor, but if
Yeah.
we're going to run into issues with deviating, we just need to know.
Yeah.
right, and that's what I was going to say. This comes directly from the model policy, and we are required to follow that substantially by this new Florida Administrative Code rule. And so I would be cautious about changing anything that was provided to us directly from the Office of Safe Schools to implement into policy.
But
Okay.
Sarah, I did not find a definition for mental illness. Did you find it? I didn't find it in the model policy, so it must have come from someplace else. The substantive threats one is directly verbatim. I'm looking at it right now. It's exactly what we have in our policy. Oh,
Yeah.
John's got.
Yeah, I just found it, but go ahead, John.
394.455, subsection 29. Mental illness means an impairment of the mental or emotional processes that exercise conscious control of one's actions or the ability to perceive or understand reality, which impairment substantially interferes with the person's ability to meet the ordinary demands of living. That's where I think our definition stops. Then it continues. For the purposes of this part, the term does not include a developmental disability as defined in Chapter 393, intoxication, or conditions manifested only by dementia, traumatic brain injury, antisocial behavior, or substance abuse.
Okay. So I'm on the wrong board to fix that one. So we'll go with that. But I just for the record, I think that many times mental illness is when there's a lack of conscious control, not the conscious control. When you are conscious of something, you may have mental illness, but it's less likely that it would be true mental illness. Real mental illness is when you are not conscious of it. It's just really bizarre, right?
Madam Chair, I think you raise an important point, though. If it is directly from statutes, we ought to give attribution.
Yes.
So someone doesn't come and correct the board that you got something that's an
Yeah.
inappropriate definition, then
If
I
I'm
think.
schizophrenic, I'm delusional. I am not consciously making a decision. That's the.
I think we put it in quotation marks and give credit where
I
credit
agree.
is due.
Which I would be inclined to do with the other language as well, to say something per the policy, the question is, and attribute it to them. But anyway, it's not that offensive. The other one, conscious thing, is kind of, for me, is pretty offensive because.
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
So in looking at it, when you look at the definition, it says an impairment of the mental or emotional processes. So it's saying an impairment of the processes that exercise conscious control. So I think what it's saying is, I think it's agreeing with you. It's not, you're not in conscious control. You have an impairment that
Is exercising conscious control.
exercising those mental and emotional processes.
Yeah, but the only problem I'm having, John, is if you look at the definition of conscious, I still don't think that it's exercising conscious control. Maybe it is, and sometimes it is, and I think it would probably depend on what illness you're talking about, but there's not always conscious. There's an impairment, yes. I hear what you're saying. I'll read it over and over again a couple more times and see if I can get myself comfortable with it.
Can I ask for clarification on something?
Yes.
That was mentioned. For each of the definitions or only the ones you mentioned, is that a suggestion you would like for us to go in and say pursuant to Florida statutes or pursuant to the model policy, or is the reference at the end under specific authority sufficient, or we can go back and add that in so that way they know that it's not our language, that it actually comes from statute or the DOE?
On the question is, John, I see what you're saying. Let me back up. I see what you're saying. It's saying that it's an impairment of the mental and emotional processes. It's an impairment of those processes which would otherwise exercise conscious control, is what you're saying, right?
Yes.
I understand. Okay. Back to the question, whether we're just going to leave the language, the question is whether, or the determination. John, you're going to probably say don't change it to the determination because it's not exactly what is in that policy. So we can just leave it the way it is, or we can say per whatever that
Per the
document is.
Office of Safe Schools model policy, or per the
Yeah.
Florida statute or rule, depending on where it came from? Would you like me
Yeah,
to add that to
those
each
two.
definition?
Yeah.
How about, Madam Chair, how about that's in the footnote that
Okay.
we acknowledge the language here is pursuant to statute or the model policy, so people understand where it comes from.
No, that's a great way to do it. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Member Gallo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I remember my question. And it is on page 45. So, and I know that this was put in 590, that we have to notify parents anytime there's a threat, and that includes transient threats. So, and we're going to follow the law, but I guess my question is how will that be communicated to parents? I know it kind of outlines it, and it's in the scope, it's in the threat assessment procedure guide, but like realistically, how many like transient threats at one school could we have? Like, I mean, are parents going to get like overloaded with information and get like tons of calls and start getting really annoyed by the amount of calls that they're getting? And will it frighten parents because we're notifying them of transient threats, substantive threats, and then seriously substantive threats, correct? And how will we define each as not to overly concern parents on the lesser threats, the transient threats? That's my concern. And I'm just concerned about really inundated them with all this information along with all the other information and communication that we have to provide to our parents.
So this is something that we actually worked with our communications department on and drafting some sort of language that we could use for parents when it's transient or substantive. So a transient notification is going to be not as detailed, I would say, as a substantive threat. So if it's a transient threat, it's going to be something along the lines of, and I apologize, I don't have it in front of me, but something along the lines of, there was a threat made towards your child today at school. However, it's been resolved. It was a joke. It was, and kind of try to calm the parent down and talk them down. Mm-hmm. Whereas a substantive threat, if it's a very serious threat, that's going to be something that's more, law enforcement's involved and we're investigating this and we're looking into it. The Code of Student Conduct will be applied, if deemed necessary. So I think it's what we communicate that would make the difference there.
Okay, so we're only communicating, and this doesn't, we're clearly not telling them who made the threat because that would violate statute, right? Like the privacy issue. So are we letting the parent know who the threat came from? And are we only just notifying the parent? So say if there was a serious threat, substantive, I think I said that correctly. I have a hard time with that word. Would we have to notify everybody was involved? Would be notifying the whole school? And who would make the determination on who's notified and who's not notified?
So that depends on the threat itself. So if it's a threat to a specific person and it's a threat to kill and it's a very serious threat. I mean, if it's very serious, they have a detailed plan. There's intent. They have access to the firearm or weapon or whatever it is. They've perhaps drawn it out and they know what they're going to do. That's going to be considered a very serious substantive threat. Mm-hmm. And so in those situations, we are actually permitted to disclose the other student's name for protective reasonings because it is a health, safety, and welfare emergency. And so for those specific ones where it's that severe of a threat, then we are permitted to disclose that. But for transient threats or things like that, we wouldn't disclose that information. Does that make sense? And then I'm sorry, could you repeat your other question?
So like who would determine like who gets notified? So for example, if a student threatened the school, was going to shoot up the school, and there was evidence that this was a very serious threat, would then we be required to tell every student at that school that this by the student's name and the threat that incurred? Would that be the process?
So the process would be they would contact their the principal supervisor. So the principal would contact their supervisor, associate, mm-hmm. or area superintendent or chief of high schools, and then they would work with communications and drafting some sort of Connect Orange that would go out to all families. I believe in the Connect Orange, though, we do not disclose the particular student's name because now you're looking about a reverse effect, per se, right. Because now the whole school is against that one child, and so that's not something you would almost be putting that student then at danger by disclosing their name.
Okay. So and it would probably just go up the line to determine who would be notified and who would be told and whatnot, depending on the threat.
Correct.
Okay, so it'd be a case by case.
Correct. Yeah, okay. And it is. And I know communications work with schools all the time, and they come up with different verbiage depending on exactly what happened in that specific instance.
Okay. I was just, in my mind, I was thinking for every transient threat that the entire school population would be hearing about the threat and we would be inundating parents with calls.
No, that's all we would do.
Yeah, that is all we would do.
There's quite a few.
Yes, that's what I was concerned about.
It was just a joke.
Right.
Type responses by the kids. So.
Right. Perfect. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Member Lopez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I understand that the terminologies that are in the statute cannot be changed, but can we add to the policy in order to protect the rights of other type of parents definition. For example, we can have a male trans giving birth and still a parent. He's a dad. We can have a child with two dads. How is going to work?
So this particular definition, like I said, did come directly from statute, and it matches what's currently in KBBA. But this isn't one that's required to be in our policy. So
It's required to be.
the parent definition is not required to
It's
be
not
in
required.
this particular policy. We wanted to add in parent because we reference parent legal guardian a lot throughout the policy, and then especially with the reasonable attempt to notify, that kind of goes into who the parent guardian is. So this one, I'm an attorney, so I don't like to go against the legal definition, but because we're not required to have this, there is a possibility that we could change our definition of what a parent is and then also incorporate that into KBBA, which is going to be coming up at the end of this presentation.
Yeah, I think that would be great because I don't know, I would love to hear from my, colleagues as well, because I think that we might do something that is not right or inclusive.
So let me chime in, and this is a question to the attorneys. So you have two men who have shared custody of a child. One of the two is the paternal father. Potentially, it's unknown which of the two is the paternal father because they chose not to know. They both provided sperm, and they're not sure which one is the actual the biological paternal father.
But, for example, we can have a trans male giving birth to a child, but it's a trans male.
Can I make a recommendation just looking
Go ahead.
at this? What if we took out the terms woman and man or mother and father and just replaced it with person? And then mother and father with parent. So it would read, parent means a person who gives birth to a child or a person whose consent to the adoption of the child would be required under section 63.062 Florida statutes. If the child has been legally adopted, the term parent means the adoptive parent of the child.
Okay. I think that
Would
addresses.
that work? I
Yeah,
think that
that's a
kind of
much easier
fits
way to address it.
everybody.
Yeah. The question that I had in the other situation, I think would turn into a question of who the court determined to be the legal guardian, right?
If I may,
Sarah,
I know
please.
that when we have two fathers in Florida and they adopt, they're usually listed. When there are two fathers in Florida and they adopt, they're generally listed as parent one and parent two on
Okay.
the birth certificate, which is allowed, so.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, I wasn't quite sure what happened in that situation, so that helps. So they're both the parents/guardians. Perfect. Okay, and that answer, Sarah, was so much more efficient. Thank you for jumping in with that. Member Lopez, anything else?
Will be all, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, I think we are finished with threats. I want to take pulse here. It's 1 o'clock. We have a number of policies still to go. I've looked ahead. I'm happy to report to you all that I have very little in the next 3 policies that I've highlighted any concerns over. The last policy, KBBA, I have only about a quarter of the way through, so I don't know. How does the rest of the board feel about, should we plod forward for a while more? I do have a 2 o'clock appointment. You want to move forward another half an hour and see where we are? Okay, let's try it. Dr. Jenkins.
Okay, so we're going to move on to JLF, reporting child abuse and child protection. Thank you.
You need me, I'm
Thank you. The purpose of the revisions are to include statutory updates and align the policy with current practice. Action summary, revisions have been made to the existing policy language to include content, formatting, and terminology edits consistent with statutory language. So our title currently reads Reporting Child Abuse / Child Protection. We are trying to get away from using slashes because we're trying to make all of our policies searchable. And so when you have a slash, that kind of messes with that search. So instead of / just putting reporting child abuse and child protection. And then also for the title in this section, it currently reads reporting of child abuse and child neglect. However, the statute includes child abuse, abandonment, and neglect. And so just recommending to change that to modify or to align with Florida statute. So the very first paragraph, your quasi-introduction paragraph, we're recommending updating the chapters there to chapters 39 and 1006, as those are the chapters that reference this. And then also adding in the term abandonment, and you'll see that throughout the policy. Reporting procedures. These sections are modified as a report to DCF and law enforcement should be made regardless of whether the alleged abuser is a child's caretaker. So there were the original sections 1 and 2 related to when an alleged abuser was the child's caretaker and when they were not the child's caretaker, but in my legal opinion, that does not matter because we're required to report no matter what. So the first subsection would read, school personnel shall immediately report suspected child abuse, abandonment, and or neglect to the Department of Children and Families by calling the 24-hour toll-free DCF Central Abuse Hotline at 1-800-96-ABUSE. And then we're also adding in the permission for staff to use the online reporting portal by adding that language or by reporting through DCF's online portal located at myfloridafamilies.com. For subsection 2, revising that to read, school personnel may also notify the appropriate law enforcement agency, which may include the school resource officer, if the reporter is not transferred to the responding law enforcement agency by DCF. Okay. For subsection 3, adding in language in compliance with section 39.201 Florida statutes that require reports involving a child who has exhibited inappropriate sexual behavior be made to the Central Abuse Hotline. For the next proposed revision, our policy currently reads that the person suspecting the abuse and or neglect shall make the report, again adding in the term abandonment there. And then it also required that the principal be informed and a report be made to employee relations. However, that's not the case. That's typically not what we do unless it's employee related. So if an employee is involved, we will refer it to employee relations, but if an employee is not involved, it will not be referred to them. So to correct that and update it to current practice, the new recommended proposal would read, the principal must be informed following the telephone or online report. We also have language in here that we're recommending to modify, which would align with section 39.201 Florida statutes regarding making a good faith report to DCF and absolving or making the employee immune from civil or criminal liability. And it would read, school personnel reporting in good faith any instance of child abuse, abandonment, and or neglect to DCF or any law enforcement agency shall be immune from civil or criminal liability resulting from reporting activity per Florida statutes. The next proposed revision is modified or is added to align with sections 39.201 and 39.202 Florida statutes, which does require school personnel to disclose their name to the Central Abuse Hotline, but does allow their name to remain confidential and exempt from further disclosure. So school personnel making a report to the Central Abuse Hotline are required to provide his or her name to the Central Abuse Hotline counselor. The name of the reporter is confidential and exempt from public disclosure per Chapter 39 Florida statutes. Okay. We are recommending adding in the child protection interviews section. And we currently have some language on it, but we're recommending adding in more, which would align with our current practice. So if a DCF agent or law enforcement officer requests to interview the child during school hours, the principal or designee shall be immediately notified, and the following shall be conducted before the interview with the child. First, the principal or designee shall request to see the DCF agent's or officer's official agency-issued identification and any court documentation which would connect them to that child, if applicable. Then they shall be brought to a private area to avoid any disruptions. The principal or designee shall contact the supervisor of the DCF agent or officer and confirm his or her identity or authority, and assignment to the child. And the principal or designee shall request a business card from the DCF agent or officer and ask if the parent or legal guardian can be contacted before the interview begins. Then there will be subcategories if adopted, and it would read, if the DCF agent or officer allows the parent or legal guardian to be contacted before the interview begins, the principal or designee shall make a reasonable attempt to notify the parent or legal guardian immediately. Or if the DCF agent or officer does not allow the parent or legal guardian to be contacted before the interview begins, the principal or designee shall request the DCF agent or officer to provide a written statement denying the request. If the DCF agent or officer refuses to provide a written statement, the principal or designee and one additional staff member shall acknowledge the refusal in writing and contact the parent or legal guardian as soon as the DCF agent or officer has concluded his or her business. Again, under the same category of child protection interviews, looking at the procedures, adding in that the DCF agent or officer may have access to the child's educational records if it is a health, safety, and welfare emergency, obviously, or they're allowed to be present during the initial interview of the student, which is allowed in Chapter 39 Florida statutes. And then also adding in language that was later on in the policy, but just moving it up to this section because we're talking about a staff member coming in and sitting in the initial interview, basically that all information received during the interview or from any other source regarding the alleged abuse, abandonment, and or neglect of the child is confidential and exempt from public disclosure, except as otherwise provided by court order. A separate record of the investigation of the abuse, abandonment, and or neglect may not be maintained by the school or school staff member. And that's for when we have DCF or law enforcement coming in and doing an interview with the child. If the child or that agent requests that a staff member be present because maybe it's better for the child or they feel more comfortable with that person, they are not allowed to take notes or disclose that information outside of that interview. Again, here, if this kind of goes with the same section on the interviews, if a child's to be taken into custody. So if law enforcement or a DCF agent take a child into protective custody without the consent or knowledge of the parent or legal guardian, then we obviously need to notify the parent or legal guardian, except when we've been requested not to notify them. So it gives schools additional procedures into what they can do. So the first would be if they allow the principal or designee to notify the parent or legal guardian before the child is taken into protective custody, the principal or designee shall make a reasonable attempt to notify the parent or legal guardian immediately. If they refuse to allow the parent or legal guardian to be notified, then just like before, the principal or designee shall request the officer or DCF agent or officer to provide a written statement denying the request. If the DCF agent or officer refuses to provide a written statement, the principal or designee and one additional staff member shall acknowledge the refusal in writing and contact the parent or legal guardian as soon as the DCF agent or officer has concluded his or her business. And then there's also a section there that is not on the red line, but just so everyone knows that the officer or DCF agent are also required to notify the parent, and that's under state statute. And then the last section on here for institutional abuse, majority of it is removed, and then we add a reference to the management directive. So suspected abuse, abandonment, and or neglect of students by school personnel shall be reported as provided in the relevant management directive. The suspected abuse, abandonment, and or neglect of students by school personnel shall be reported to law enforcement. Dr. Jenkins.
Vice Chair.
Thank you. I just am asking for an explanation as to why the language at the very beginning of this policy is changed to may also, hold on, I'm sorry, let me just back up and find where I'm looking. School personnel may also notify the appropriate law enforcement agency. It did say it was crossed out when the alleged abuser is not a caretaker. So in other words, when it is suspected to be a family member, it's optional as to notifying the law enforcement. I'm just wondering why that is. Why is it different if it's a family member?
So not necessarily that's different when it's a family member versus when it's not. We added in the school personnel may notify law enforcement because there may be instances where law enforcement doesn't have to be contacted, or maybe DCF says that they're going to handle that on their end, or they're going to contact law enforcement, or they may not take the case. So I don't want schools to feel like if they call DCF and DCF says, well, we're not taking the case, that then they also have to go notify law enforcement. But we can change it back to shall if that's something that the board would like to see school personnel do every single time.
No, I don't think that that's necessarily my concern. Was just that it sounds like it gave me the impression when I read the policy that it's just like if you suspect that a child is being abused, that you don't have to report it to the police, which I realize you don't have to. You have to report it to DCF, but I'm feeling like it should be reported to law enforcement, because if you call it into DCF, that could take a while. It could take 24 hours. And if you suspect that it's a parent that's abusing this child, I'm concerned about sending that child home from school that day. And so that's more my concern. I don't know if anyone else is reading this the way I am, or if we could get some other input, that might be helpful.
That's a good idea, Vice Chair. Everyone else's thought on this? I hear what you're saying. As a middle ground approach, and I hear what you're saying as well in terms of why we might not want to. There are times when there are a few occasions when I haven't been particularly pleased with the way DCF has responded to things. And so it does make me nervous that just because DCF didn't do something with it or do something with it in a prompt fashion, that there wouldn't be a responsibility to report it to law enforcement. But perhaps, and Dr. Jenkins, I'd love to hear your thought on this, perhaps it's something that the school personnel should be required to at least report up to, whether it's the principal, some level it gets reported to determine whether law enforcement is made aware of it. Right,
I like the administrator, the school administrator being made aware of it as well.
yeah. So the thought there, Vice Chair, would be that the person who's reporting it to DCF also reports it to the principal, at which time the principal will make a determination as to whether or not it shall be reported to law enforcement. Would you be comfortable with that? Takes a little bit of a burden off of the person who's reported it already once to DCF and been said, not an issue, not taking it up. Now we're telling that person, now you got to turn around and report it to police, and they may be thinking, God, I already made a mountain out of a molehill out of this issue that was apparently not an issue, and now I have this further duty, and by getting another person involved at a higher level, it might put that person's mind at ease in terms of their responsibility and put it more squarely in the hands of an administrator who might be able to better judge whether it needs to be elevated.
Yes, I think maybe having, it's kind of like two sets of eyes on it.
Right.
That might be helpful. If I could just ask a follow-up though, why did the policy originally say when the alleged abuser is not a caretaker, school personnel shall notify the appropriate law enforcement agency?
Any idea?
I would love to answer that question, but I was not here when this policy was initially drafted it was initially drafted in 2008, and then it was revised again in 2017, and that would have been the same month and year that I started. So I'm not entirely sure. I know that Amy and John have been here a little longer. I don't know if they have any insight. No.
All right.
Sorry.
Well,
it's fine. It doesn't matter. I was just curious as to why it would have been required, or why, if we didn't want to burden them, why we would have required it before. And why it's just for if it's not a caretaker. That's what's confusing me. I don't understand what the difference is really, because abuse is abuse, unless it's notifying the families. Obviously, you don't want to do that if you assume it's someone in the family, but I'm not understanding what the difference is between why it said the non-caretaker. But I'm glad that that's being taken out. So I guess that's neither here nor there. So thank you. I'm good.
So, Member Byrd, would you be in agreement then with having the personnel report it up to, at a minimum, the principal for determination as to whether or not to report it to law enforcement?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it is, we don't require now, and I think you mentioned this, and my apologies if I missed it, but we don't require now for a teacher, if a teacher calls in to DCF something, for them to let their administrator know?
I thought we did, but do we not require that?
So actually, further down in the policy, we do require the principal to be informed following the telephone report. And so I'm just wondering if maybe we move that section up and just kind of move things around a little bit, so that way that would actually come first. And then I can add in some language here for that second piece on school personnel may also notify appropriate law enforcement agency. And I'll wordsmith that to where it's school personnel shall notify the principal or designee, who then may also notify, if that is okay with everybody.
I just want to be clear that we're still, I'm sorry, Member Byrd.
No, I was just going to say that's fine. Sounds good to me.
I just want to be clear. The initial reporting is the employee's responsibility. So I don't want anyone to misread that to indicate, I told my principal and that was sufficient. That does not absolve them of their responsibility by statute.
Right, and as I understand the change we're going to make, that employee has to report it to DCF. That employee then has to notify the principal or the supervisor, whatever, I'm assuming it's not always a principal, that of the situation and that it's been reported to DCF. And then that principal, administrator, whoever that person is, will then determine whether to also report it to law enforcement.
So here comes John again.
Hey, John.
Because there's no prohibition from the employee reporting it directly to law enforcement as well.
We also have provisions in our school justice partnership agreements that says if there's any criminal activity that occurs on campus, we shall report it to law enforcement. So potentially, if it's an on-campus allegation against a school employee who has committed what we think to be child abuse, that would be criminal in nature. So we would have to report it to DCF and to law enforcement. We always, and by we, I mean the professional standards department that handles this, whenever there's questions, we always advise to call law enforcement and let them not take it. Because, the nightmare scenario is what we had, I guess it was in one of the counties in the Panhandle, I guess 3 years ago, where the sheriff decided he was going to arrest everybody from low-level bus driver employee all the way up to associate superintendent of human resources for not reporting these things. So that's why, and we had a situation, as I wasn't here in the mid-'90s, but I've heard this situation in the mid-'90s where we had something very similar, where we had threats from the sheriff to arrest everybody on the line up to the associate superintendent of human resources for not reporting these things. That's why we always err on the side of caution. Of
So John,
reporting.
why don't we just go back to the shall language and then leave it in the hands of law enforcement as to what to do? That was where Member Byrd started.
I think I'm good with that from a legal perspective.
Vice Chair, you okay? We're going to go back to shall report it to law enforcement? And of course, they're also.
Yes, I realize that it's an extra step and it may put a little extra burden, but in my eyes, it's just another safety precaution, for the child, if we really are concerned about abuse.
All right, we have nods here, so let's go that direction. That doesn't change the fact that the employee is then going to report it to, again, I keep saying principal. I forget what the language is, but if that employee is a bus driver, they might be reporting it to their supervisor. So you'll come up with the language and come back with that, okay? Vice Chair, I interrupted you, but did you have anything else?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, great. Anybody else? Okay, I'm quickly running out of time. You want to try to take one more? I mean, I can leave and you guys can handle this because I've gone through the rest of these and I'm pretty comfortable. So let's take one more, and then if I need to go, you guys can just decide when you're going to adjourn. Okay? All right. Next policy.
Okay. JLIE. By the way, I forgot to tell you that this is the Sarah show now at this point. So JLIE, student automobile use. JLIE is being revised to align the policy with current practice and our current student automobile decal agreement that they signed. So we want to make sure everything aligns. And then revisions have been made to the existing policy language to include content, formatting, and terminology edits consistent with statutory language. So the first recommended addition that we put in there is in regards to liability, and it would read: the School Board of Orange County, Florida, Orange County Public Schools, OCPS employees and agents, and any law enforcement personnel shall not be responsible for any theft, loss, or damage to any vehicle on board property or at any school-sponsored event, so long as the OCPS employee, agent, and/or law enforcement officer are acting within the course and/or scope of their employment. We are also recommending adding language in here for a student to obtain their parking decal, which would read: each student shall be required to apply for a parking decal from his or her school of enrollment before being permitted to drive on campus. Parking decals are non-transferable and cannot be sold to or shared with any other student, person, or entity. We're also recommending adding in language pertaining to the student's responsibility for any items found within the student's vehicle. And the new proposed addition would read: each student is responsible for all contents contained within the vehicle he or she drives on school property. For vehicle searches, we're recommending adding the following: a student's vehicle is subject to search at any time while on school property. The search may include the use of canine detection dogs If a student refuses to cooperate with the search of a vehicle, the board employees, and agents may have the vehicle towed or removed from board property at the owner's expense according to board policy ECE, titled Traffic and Parking Procedures. For the next section, the rules and revocation, we're recommending adding the following sentence to the end of students permitted to have vehicles at school shall observe the following rules, and then adding in, if a student fails to comply with this policy or any school board of Orange County, Florida policy, school regulation or rule, or any condition contained in the application for the parking decal, the student's parking decal and parking privilege may be immediately revoked by the school principal or designee. And then adding in regulations to the first requirement there, that students shall drive with care and observe all traffic regulations and laws. And then the last portion was in reference to students and visitors. However, since this is the student automobile policy, we're recommending removing visitor and rephrasing the statement to read, students are prohibited from bringing a firearm or weapon on school grounds. This includes, but is not limited to, possessing or carrying a firearm or weapon on his or her person in a vehicle, container, or other conveyance which may be located in the student's vehicle. Dr. Jenkins.
Vice Chair? Or is this left over from before?
That must be left over. I'm
Okay,
good.
I'm so sorry, my error. Anybody have any comments or concerns? No. Keep moving.
Perfect. Turn over to you, sister. Oh, sorry. No, it's okay.
Good morning, everyone. I also have Miss.
Oh, it sure
this
is
afternoon. I apologize. We're still in the morning. I also have Mr. Doug Patterson with me here, who can also answer any questions regarding this policy. JJ is on extracurricular activities, and it is being revised to amend the policy to reflect district practices and include updates pursuant to sections 100231, 100615, and 100620 of the Florida statutes. The language has been redrafted into 3 sections: definitions, general requirements, and eligibility, to reflect current district practice and governing law. So the title in the first section was changed. It was middle/high school extracurricular athletic programs. It was changed to middle and high school co-curricular, extracurricular, and athletic programs. Then a definition section was Then first we created a section 1, and the heading was added, and it is now definitions. And we created 3 definitions in that section. So section 1A was added to define athletic program. An athletic program is defined as inter-school sporting programs on the middle high school level. Section 1B is added to define co-curricular program and activities. 1B, co-curricular program and activities tied to a course code that occur outside of the educational class period. And examples of that would be JROTC, band, theater, chorus, and yearbook. Section 1C is added to define extracurricular programs/activities, and these are activities organized outside of the educational class period. It says intend there, it should be intended, to meet students' interests, supervised by a school employee, and that would be student government, chess club, National Honor Society, etc. Then we created heading 2, and initially, again, this was all one section, so we created 3 sections out of one section, and it is the general requirements. Section 2A added co-curricular to the section, and it also changed teacher to employee. So it now says the co-curricular extracurricular athletic program shall be considered an essential part of the total school program and shall be under the principal's direction and general supervision. The principal shall select the personnel to direct and act as advisors for the various co-curricular, extracurricular athletic activities. Care shall be exercised to limit the load assigned to any one employee. This was a change from employee to teacher because under the CTA contract, extracurricular sponsorship is first given to a teacher if they choose. it would go to a classified personnel if instructional personnel cannot pick up the position. So we wanted to specify first that it could be any employee, but it still does go to a teacher first. The next section is 2B. It says that it is a new provision, and it is a new provision in this section. It was in the policy later down, and it has been wordsmithed a little. So it says the principal shall be responsible for determining each participant's eligibility for co-curricular, extracurricular, and athletic activities. Any high school which allows an ineligible student to participate shall be subject to the penalties set forth by the bylaws of the Florida High School Athletics Association. And the FHSAA part is added in there because this does talk about eligibility, not just for co-curricular and extracurricular activities, but also that athletic portion. So FHSAA would govern that athletic portion. Section 2C was also old, but it has been modified a little and put in here. And it says students shall obtain written permission from a parent legal guardian to participate in co-curricular, extracurricular activities that require travel and/or FHSAA sanctioned competition. In the old policy, it is worth noting that written permission was required for all extracurricular activities. The next section is 2D. Students shall not be excluded from participating in co-curricular, extracurricular, or athletic activities for lack of money for dues, materials, or uniforms. Section 2E states that funds derived from co-curricular, extracurricular athletic activities shall be processed according to district accounting procedures. We want to make sure that money is handled in the proper way. And 2F is also a new provision that states in order to participate in co-curricular, extracurricular athletic programs, the student must adhere to board policies, school-based criteria, the rules and regulations of the Florida High School Athletic Association where applicable, and applicable law. The behavioral expectations placed upon the student by the school can extend beyond the classroom and school campus to the extent such conduct occurring beyond the school classroom and school campus causes a substantial disruption on the operation of the team and/or the school. Pursuant to Florida law, the board has the authority to withhold the privilege of participating in extracurricular activities from students. Any student who commits a felony, is charged with or adjudicated guilty of a felony, or has a felony probation shall be excluded from participation in co-curricular, extracurricular activities and athletics for a period of up to 1 calendar year or longer. And the statutory reference for that is in 100615, which is being updated today to state that a student can be excluded from an extracurricular activity because of their otherwise extracurricular activities off campus. Next, we have a third section where we created the eligibility section. This section remains largely unchanged except for some of the provisions that were moved to the prior section. So in here, for ease of time, subsections were added. We added the abbreviation for the Florida High School Athletic Association. We added co-curricular wherever extracurricular and athletic activities was cited. And then we also cited the new statutes. Next, there is a second entire section of the policy. It was dissemination of information regarding all extracurricular activities at each middle and high school. We added co-curricular and extracurricular in this section. The word pupil was changed to student in this section. Orange County School Board was changed to School Board of Orange County. Legal guardians was added to parent, so it was just parent, and now it says parent/legal guardians. Student Code of Conduct was changed to the Code of Student Conduct. Co-curricular was added to wherever it says extracurricular and athletic, and statutory citations in this section were also updated. And then for reference, yes, and that's all that there was in this section. Dr. Jenkins.
Member Gallo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question. I know that it was stated earlier that we're trying to avoid hyphenate or slash marks. Yeah, so that it would be easily searchable, and it looks like we're going from legal guardians was added to parent legal guardians. Does that mean we were splitting them up, or are we going back? Are we adding? And it says co-curricular was also added to extracurricular / athletic activities.
So it's in the titles of we're trying to, in the titles.
Oh,
so
just in the
this-
titles, we're trying to make it searchable,
Mhm.
not in the actual document.
Right,
Got it. Thank
right.
you.
All right, any further discussion? Then I think we're ready for our next policy, Dr. Jenkins.
Wow.
That was it?
Fantastic.
I thought we had one more. Yeah, okay.
And this one, while Sarah's getting ready,
KBBA.
Member Gallo, this is the one that, we have two policies that talk about parents' rights and responsibilities. So since we're going away from the NEPN classification system, this might be one that you might want to consider renaming. We have not proposed a renaming of this one, but this one really deals with custodial rights. And you'll go, when Sarah goes through it, you'll see that. But this one might be something that we want to change the name of it, actually.
Okay. So as Ms. Enval was just explaining, this is really our policy that deals with parents or guardians who have some sort of court order in place pertaining to their custody or legal rights to the child. And so if we'd like to change the title, I am more than happy to listen to suggestions. But the purpose is KBBA is being revised to update the policy to include additional legal terminology and clarify how different orders may impact a parent or legal guardian's involvement at school. Revisions have been made to the existing policy language to include content, formatting, and terminology edits consistent with statutory language. So as we've done, you've seen today throughout, we've added legal guardian, but in this specific modification, we're adding the term legal guardian to the definition of guardian. Also in the definition section, we're recommending adding a definition for no contact order, and the proposed addition would read, a no contact order means a court-ordered relationship with one or both parents or legal guardians that restricts contact with the parents or legal guardians and minor child or children. This term includes, but is not limited to, orders issued by the dependency court, injunctions, and the domestic relations court. I made a note here as well, Ms. Lopez, about the parent definition. I know it's not on the PowerPoint, but I'll go back and modify that to change it, or to match JICK as we discussed earlier. And then under shared parental responsibility, the definition for that, I'm recommending adding in the term joint legal custody. Although Florida doesn't use that term joint legal custody anymore, it is used commonly in other states, and so sometimes we get out-of-state orders, and I just wanted to make that clear for schools and parents that it means the same thing as shared parental responsibility. Still in the definition section for sole parental responsibility, kind of the same explanation I just gave for the joint legal custody, adding in sole educational decision-making authority and sole legal custody. So Florida does use sole parental responsibility and sole educational decision-making authority. We do not use the sole legal custody term anymore, or phrase, and so that is used in other states, but I believe it's good to have here because we do have a lot of families that move here from other states. And then also adding in that it means a court-ordered relationship in which one parent or legal guardian makes decisions regarding the minor child for educational purposes. I'm also recommending adding in a definition for supervised visitation to include supervised time sharing. And the meaning for that would be a court-ordered relationship in which one or both parents or legal guardians cannot have contact with the minor child without an approved third party or agency present. So under the family-related court documentation section, I recommend adding, while Orange County Public Schools will accept and review, adding in applicable and school-related court documentation reflecting the custody of a student, the School Board of Orange County, Florida, and OCPS will remain neutral in all custody matters. The reason for adding that in is because sometimes we get court orders from parents or court documentation that do not affect the school, and so we just want to make it clear that it should be related to the school. Under the same subsection, family-related court documentation for the address on file, currently the policy references that if parents or legal guardians refuse to provide court documentation, then OCPS will refer to the parent or guardian whose address is on file with the Office of Student Enrollment. However, the more accurate statement is that it's the address on file that's used for registration purposes. So that's going to be the address in Skyward, whereas the Office of Student Enrollment doesn't house all addresses. For the next proposed revision, it would be for the visitation section. So currently the policy reads OCPS may not be used as a visitation site unless specifically required by court order. However, I recommend modifying that to OCPS may not be used as a visitation site for supervised visitation, because when this was initially put into place, that was the intent of it, but it's just to really for families. For the same section, for family-related court documentation pertaining to supervised visitation and no contact orders. So again, further clarifying that, I recommend adding in parents or legal guardians who have an active supervised visitation and or no contact order shall not be permitted on board property where the child who the order is in place to protect is present. This includes, but is not limited to, schools, school transportation, and school-sponsored events. Staying in the same section under the time-sharing schedules, currently it says that although OCPS will attempt to accommodate time-sharing schedules, it is the parent or guardian's ultimate responsibility for ensuring compliance with court-ordered time-sharing. However, I'm recommending that we modify that to, although OCPS may reference a court-ordered time-sharing schedule and or a custody order when there is a dispute between the parents or legal guardians, it is the parent's ultimate responsibility for ensuring compliance with their court order. The reason for that is because we are not required to enforce time-sharing agreements between parents. It's really their responsibility to do that, and I just wouldn't want the policy language to give a parent the idea that we are somehow the enforcers of that time-sharing arrangement. So for the enrollment withdrawal section, there are a list of people under that section that can enroll or withdraw a student from school. Currently, it reads the mother of a child born out of wedlock, absent court documentation. That's in compliance with Section 744.301 Florida statutes, which presumes the mother has sole care and custody of a child unless there's a court order stating otherwise, if the child's born out of wedlock. However, in Orange County and Osceola County, so our 9th Judicial Circuit, they've issued an administrative order, which is kind of a temporary order that gets put in place when a parent files for paternity. And within that order, it requires that this child not be relocated from his or her current school, which matches kind of when a parent, Section 2 down there, when a parent's file for dissolution of marriage. So the language would read, if there is a pending paternity case between the parents and the father has been adjudicated the father as provided in Chapter 742 Florida statutes, the child cannot be relocated from his or her current school so long as at least one parent remains in the school zone or the student qualifies for a transfer under board policy JCA. Sorry. I want to make sure I'm on the correct slide. Yes, okay. So for address designation, in parenting plans in the state of Florida, typically there's an education section which designates one parent's address over the other for school boundary determination. So that would be our enrolling withdrawing parent if they have that. And so currently in your policy, it says the parent guardian whose address is designated by court order for school boundary determination. I'm recommending adding in, if an address is not designated, the parent legal guardian will be required to go to the Office of Student Enrollment. And that is our current practice. So if there's not one specific address designated, or perhaps it says the parents have to agree, they can go down to Student Enrollment and sign an affidavit agreeing to use one parent's address over the other. And that's really just to clarify our current practice. I'm also recommending adding in under the enrollment or withdrawal of a student from school, the sentence that, or the person who can do that is that the parent legal guardian who has a current court order stating the parent legal guardian has custody of the child. And that's going to be more for like our dependency cases where maybe a child is placed with a legal guardian or with a particular parent. We're obviously going to allow that person to enroll or withdraw from school. So we have another section, release of a student from school. And if the parents disagree, currently what we do is if you have two parents and they disagree as to who can sign a student out from the front office or who's basically on the pickup list, we remove everyone except for the parents, and then the parents have to agree, submit an agreed to list, or provide us a court order saying that they can designate a certain person or however many people the court order allows them to do that. However, that does only apply to parents who have shared decision-making authority or equal decision-making authority, so I'm recommending adding that caveat in here. So it would read, in the event that parents or legal guardians who have equal decision-making authority, such as shared parental responsibility, or are currently married, disagree as to a third party being authorized. So that's just really clarifying that there. And then down below it, also adding in that if they are designated as having sole decision-making authority, such as sole parental responsibility or sole time sharing, the parent or guardian with this designation may authorize third parties to pick up the child or children from school without consent from the other parent or guardian. We also, under the release of a student from school, there's a reference to the school bus. How a student is released from the regular school time must ride the school bus home that is their designated school bus unless the principal or designee has agreed to a deviation. And I just recommend adding in that this section includes riding the school bus home to each parent or legal guardian's home if the parents and legal guardians live separately. On to the next section, visiting a student at school. I recommend adding in or school activity because sometimes we do have parents that go on field trips and things like that. And then also adding in a provision regarding no contact orders and or supervised visitation. So the recommended addition would read, if there is an active no contact order or an active order requiring supervised visitation or time sharing, the parent or legal guardian or third party will not be permitted to visit the student at school or during school-sponsored activities. Also, in our policy, we currently have that it's the principal of the school who has the ultimate authority to determine whether the school permits visitors during the school day. I recommend adding in during the school day, on school transportation, or during a school activity, unless Section 1 applies, which is that no contact order or supervised visitation order. So as it pertains to the time sharing schedule, again, parents are responsible for abiding by any court-ordered time sharing when visiting their child. Here it specifically references lunch in our current policy and shall not use OCPS as a way to obtain additional time sharing with their child. However, I'm recommending adding in parent legal guardians are responsible for abiding by any court-ordered time sharing scheduled when visiting their child while at school or school activity, such as for lunch, and shall not use OCPS as a way to obtain additional time sharing with their child. And then a caveat to that would be that this section would not apply to school-sponsored events where the community is invited in general. Again, for this same section, if there is a disagreement between who can visit a student at school, such as a third party, and the parents have equal decision-making authority, then current practice is that only the parents or legal guardians can visit the student unless the principal or designee is provided with prior written authorization from both parents or a court order allowing the third party to visit. Again, here just adding in that clarification that that's for parents who have equal decision-making authority, such as shared parental responsibility, or are currently married. And then adding in the exception that if the parent or legal guardian is designated as having sole decision-making authority, such as sole parental responsibility or sole time sharing, then the parent legal guardian with this designation may authorize third parties to visit the child or children it says from school, but should say at school, without consent from the other parent or legal guardian. This section does not apply to school-sponsored events where the community is invited in general. And then on to release and/or access to student records. So here we have currently that both parents or guardians of a student may view the student's records or have copies of the student's records when a request is made in writing, unless the principal or designee has provided a court order prohibiting such access. I recommend adding in, and this is really just for clarification for the school and community, that this provision applies regardless of parental responsibility or whether custody has been established. The parent or legal guardian shall provide identification confirming they are the parent or legal guardian before records are released by OCPS. The identification shall match the birth certificate of the child or children or a court order that establishes the person as the parent or legal guardian. And that's really to align with FERPA and Chapter 1002 of Florida statutes. As far as duplicate copies are concerned, we are not required, or OCPS is not required to make duplicate copies of automatically generated reports. I recommend adding in or general publications. So if it's like a yearbook notification, we're not required to make 2 sets of copies to go home to each parent's home. And then again, if there's a disagreement between the parents as to who can receive student records, adding in that caveat that they have to have equal decision-making authority. And if they do, then, I apologize, if the school receives conflicting direction from the parents or guardians who have equal decision-making authority, such as shared parental responsibility or are currently married, as to which third parties may have access to records and/or attend a parent-teacher conference, the principal or designee must be provided with prior written authorization from both parents or legal guardians or a court order permitting the third-party access. And then, of course, there's that caveat there that if they have sole decision-making authority, then they do not need consent from the other parent, that they may authorize any third-party access to their child's records. Dr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Ms. Kopesky. This really clarifies a lot of messy areas that I've seen and witnessed, unfortunately, over the years. You've done a really good job of clarifying who has responsibility for what. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Council Enval.
I just wanted to say, Sarah, I can't even tell you how many times having a clear policy is super, super important. Our schools deal with custody issues all the time. Sarah she has done a really, really good job with our front office staff and training them what they're supposed to do. But Sarah takes calls every single day. Our parents are trying to use our schools as a place for visitation or time sharing, or, they're trying to play each other. It's not my day, it's her day to pick up. But I can tell you, Sarah, her demeanor and her ability to work with staff has been very good, and it's been very consistent. But this making these changes to this policy is going to help our schools, and it also hopefully alleviate some of Sarah's responsibilities when it comes to custody matters.
I agree. It's thorough. Very, very well done.
Thank you.
Council Enval, do you have anything further? Okay. I do not see any other board members wishing to have discussion. With that, I believe we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Sarah, you're not allowed to talk the rest of the day.